the Antarctic coast a month later. For the next 3 weeks, they mapped hundreds of thousands of square miles of the continent. About 150 miles inland, aerial reconnaissance found what is described as an Arctic oasis.
This is where I get myself into a lot of trouble with archaeologists.
You've climbed all the way to the top 5 times, you said, right?
If you're more than 20 feet up and you fall, you're pretty much certain to be dead. The limestone that I was holding, which was very eroded, broke off in my hands. I fell back. Back in the 90s, a special robot was designed, which was sent up there. What it found was a door blocking the shaft. So the question is, what lies beyond that door? What we're getting is evidence that the Great Pyramid still has many secrets to reveal.
If you were given an unlimited budget, open checkbook, a team that you get to put together, and ample time to go investigate everything you can about the pyramid, what would you do?
There is one temple in Egypt that's left standing, which still contains the Atlantis account. Maps based on copies of even older source maps that somebody was mapping the world long before us. Now, this is puzzling.
Did you ever think you would make it? I feel I'm so close, I could taste sweet victory. I know this life meant for me. Yeah, why would you bet on Goliath when we got Bet David? Valuetainment, giving values contagious. This world of entrepreneurs, we get no value to haters. How they run, homie, look what I become. I'm the one.
Indeed so. Or no such thing as a lost civilization.
A lost civilization, right. No lost civilization. That's the right word.
Yeah.
And then number 2 is, there was a lost civilization. Then there's a different camp that says, yes, there's a lost civilization, but they didn't have no advanced technology that you're talking about. And then there's the third camp that says there is the lost civilization and they had incredible advanced technology. Which of those 3 do you associate yourself more with?
None of them.
None of them.
No,
So
because the word advanced is extremely nuanced. What I'm talking about, and this is an area where my work has been repeatedly, deliberately, and in a calculated way misrepresented by archaeologists who don't like my work and the ideas that I'm suggesting. When I talk about an advanced civilization, let's be clear, I think that all civilizations on this planet emerged ultimately out of shamanism. If we go back into the Stone Age, if we go back into what's called the Upper Paleolithic, we will find that the world was pretty much shamanistic at that time. Every culture, every tribe, every group would have had its shaman who was bringing healing and who was dealing, if you like, with the supernatural. That's what shamans still do today in the Amazon rainforest. So I think that all cultures emerged out of a shamanistic background. But what I'm suggesting is that during the Ice Age, there was one culture which went quite a bit further than other cultures from that same shamanistic background. It's a characteristic of shamanism, which a lot of people don't realize, that true shamans are extremely scientific. If you go to the Amazon rainforest, as I've done quite frequently, and as I do for season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, and sit down to drink the powerful visionary brew, ayahuasca, you will discover that the shamans are constantly sampling plants. They're in an experimental, highly rigorous, rational way. They're sampling plants. They're adding admixtures to an existing brew, if that's the case. How else could they have created curare, for example? Curare is an Amazonian invention. Curare is still the basis of modern anesthesiology. It involves 11 different plants, none of which are effective on their own. You have to mix them all together. Same with ayahuasca. It involves 2 different plants, none of which are effective on their own, but mixed together, they become effective. And when you remember that there's more than 100,000 different species of plants and trees in the Amazon, then you are looking at a scientific project to find, locate, and control these things. And this is true of shamanism in general. So I think that there was one shamanistic culture back during the Ice Age which went further than others. And when I say advanced, I want to be absolutely clear. I am not looking to us in the past. I am not talking about a civilization that had planes and flew to the moon or built rocket ships or Teslas, for example, a high-tech machine civilization. But I am talking about a civilization that's gone much further than others during the Stone Age. And where it's gone, where I derive this from, is the evidence of a knowledge of longitude on ancient maps. Now, longitude are the vertical lines down the map, and latitude is the horizontal. Longitude is a problem that our civilization was unable to solve until the mid-18th century. It was always a risk being out at sea in a sailing ship, and you can't quite calculate the wind speed and the currency. If you say you're sailing from Britain to America, you have no idea at any point exactly how far away you are from the American coast. And it's quite possible in the dead of night, if you've done your calculations wrong, that you're going to crash into that coast and hit it. It was a deadly, deadly problem. It was really important to know where you were at sea. It wasn't until the mid-18th century that Western civilization solved the longitude problem. And in fact, there was a huge prize being offered for anybody who could solve the longitude problem. Well, eventually they did by creating a chronometer which could keep accurate time at sea. But before that, nobody knew where they were in terms of longitude. It was always a rough guess.
These use back then. What did Columbus use when he went from Spain to Caribbean to here? Was it just a wink job?
Yeah, just rough guesswork. Just rough. And he, of course, didn't know. Columbus didn't even know for sure whether he was going to find a continent on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. But he had reason to believe he would, which touches on these ancient maps that I speak about. There was a sense that there was something there. But he wouldn't have known at any point in his voyage how far west of Greenwich in the UK he was. He wouldn't have had any idea. So knowing longitude was a real huge breakthrough for seafarers in our epoch, for our civilization. But these ancient maps that I'm speaking about, which are in many cases maps that were produced in the 14th, 13th, maybe 15th century, but always based on copies of older source maps now lost. The Orontius Phineas world map is an example. The Piri Reis map is an example. And many of the maps that are called Portolanos that map the Mediterranean Sea are an example. They all contain extremely accurate relative longitudes. And they should not do so. Even if they were just made in the 14th century and not based on earlier source maps, they should have relative longitudes, but they do. So that's one reason why I'm pretty confident that the longitude problem was cracked much, much earlier, because some of these maps show the world as it looked during the last ice age. The Orontius Phineas map actually shows Antarctica as well, yet our civilization didn't discover Antarctica until 1820, and there it is on a map from the 1500s.
I want to show you this. So maybe to the audience that doesn't follow this, if you can pull this, I just pulled up the Piri Reis map.
Well, Piri Reis is only a bit of a map. That's all that's survived from the map, and it shows a bit of South America and a bit of Africa. The relative longitudes are good, but can we find the Orontius Phineas? Orontius Finaeus.
Orontius.
Yeah, and there we are. Well, what you're seeing on that map from the mid-1500s is at the very tip of South America and at the very tip of South Africa, you're seeing Antarctica. That's what that huge land, that's South America on the right, and that's the tip of South America, and it's touching an enormous continent, which is also at the south of South Africa.
Let me show which one is South America that you're showing. So South America would be...
So keep going down, bottom right. Bottom right, keep going. That's South America.
Okay.
Go left. That's South Africa.
Okay.
Go right from there. That's Antarctica. And it even says the Antarctic Circle. That is Antarctica. And that's a problem because our civilization did not discover Antarctica until 1820. We had no idea. And there are other maps. Could you find the Pinkerton world map from 1813, say, or roughly 1813? Now, let's see how it shows Antarctica. Pinkerton world map. No, that's not the bit of it. Keep going. Yes, the next one, the first one on the left there. That
bottom middle, right there.
Middle,
no,
right.
We'll go
No.
One more
go
to
right,
the right.
one more.
Right
That's
there,
it. There, that's how Antarctica is shown on a map.
Non-existent.
It isn't there.
Right.
And that's because it's an honest map.
That's 1818.
Yeah, 1818.
And you said that's because it's an honest map?
It's an honest map because at that time, navigators from our civilization hadn't found Antarctica. So they could only say, they couldn't map it because they hadn't seen it. Okay, that's the thing. That's why there's no Antarctica on this map. But a few years later, 1820, Antarctica is discovered and it starts to appear on maps. But the anomaly is that it appears on these much earlier maps as well. Maps based on copies of even older source maps. And that suggests to me that somebody was mapping the world long before us. And furthermore, these maps often show the world amazingly much as it looked during the last ice age. The world was very different during the ice age. Antarctica was much bigger during the ice age than it is today. For example, the Malaysian Peninsula and the Indonesian islands were all joined together into a single landmass that reached almost as far as New Guinea. New Guinea was joined to Australia. This was because sea level was 400 feet lower during the ice age than it is today. The world looked very different. And some of those maps show the world as it looked during the last ice age.
Very interesting. And the fellow who discovered Antarctica was Nathaniel Palmer.
I believe so.
And do you know who he was and what he
No,
was?
because I'm fundamentally not interested in who discovered Antarctica in our era. What I am interested in is the fact that it was discovered in our era, around about 1820, and before that, there was no knowledge of Antarctica.
And so what's your point with this? Is it to go back and say the other map, which is the Pinkerton map,
Pinkerton World Map.
Pinkerton World Map, had Antarctica?
No, the Pinkerton World
It's
Map.
the honest map that didn't have
The
it.
Pinkerton World Map is an honest map based on the latest information that was available to navigators at that time. And it's not Antarctica is not on that map because they hadn't found it yet.
And why does this matter?
Well, it matters because if Antarctica is present on ancient maps,
Mhm.
then it means that somebody was able to sail the world, to explore the world's oceans, and to map the world's oceans, and furthermore to do so with rather relative longitudes. That's what I mean when I talk about an advanced civilization, a civilization that had advanced astronomy, that was able to observe the stars, understand the rising and setting points of stars, navigate using stars, and that was able to explore and map the world. Therefore, it had some significant seafaring ability. But I'm not talking about a civilization that had motor cars or airplanes or iPhones.
I got you. So you've said, I think in the Ancient Apocalypse that you don't see yourself as an archaeologist, not a scientist, but as a journalist, right? Like as a researcher.
Definitely.
So as you research and go even deeper, is there any fingerprints of who was the first to find out about Antarctica at that time, especially if it's 1400, 1300, 1500?
Well, the only
What
thing
name is mentioned?
no names are mentioned. It's just said to be there. On that Orontius Phineas map, there's a legend written in Latin at the bottom of it, and where the mapmaker boasts about revealing to the world areas that had been hidden in darkness before that. And that sounds to me like ancient maps that had been hidden away, and that some had been found. Hidden in darkness.
In traditional academia archaeologists, okay, and let's call them the establishment versus the other guys that are challenging. Anti-establishment, the establishment, the traditional way of looking at it.
Fair
Okay.
enough, yeah.
And what is their position on this? What do they say? So these are the ones that have all the degrees and the fancy degrees and universities and professors and all these papers they've written. What do they teach students since they're the...
They don't take the ancient maps seriously. They think they were exercises in fantasy by ancient map makers. They don't believe that Antarctica was discovered until 1820. They think that some map makers just thought that there should be a landmass at the bottom of the Earth and just stuck it there imaginatively in exactly the place that Antarctica is. They dismiss the whole line of reasoning on that. But for me, I'm not claiming that these maps prove there was a lost civilization, but I am saying they are a huge anomaly and a puzzle which I have plunged myself into. I'm following my curiosity wherever I go, and I'm doing so in a journalistic, not in an archaeological way. So what archaeologists study, much of it is very useful to me, and I have great respect for many archaeologists, and they do very detailed, nitty-gritty work down there in the dust, and it should be valued and it should be treasured. But I don't think it's the only way to investigate the past. I think we have to take other issues into account as well. So, for example, with the Great Sphinx of Giza, archaeologists will tell you that the Sphinx is the work of a particular pharaoh, Pharaoh Khafre, who they say built it during the Fourth Dynasty around 2500 BC, give or take 50 years. There isn't a single contemporary inscription that says Khafre built the Sphinx. Nothing whatsoever. There is a stela that's in between the paws of the Sphinx, but that was erected more than 1,000 years later. And it doesn't even contain the name Khafre. It did once contain the single syllable Kaf, but the rest of the line is missing, and there's nothing on it which says Khafre built the Sphinx. That pharaoh who put that stela up some centuries later, could have been saying that Khafre restored the Sphinx. There's nothing contemporary that says Khafre was the maker of the Sphinx. And there are other stela on the Giza Plateau which say that even Khufu, the predecessor of Khafre, knew the Sphinx. The Sphinx was already there in his time. So I think that the Egyptological case to attach the Sphinx to Khafre is extremely flimsy. The Sphinx is roughly in front of a second pyramid at Giza, which is attributed to Khafre. That's one of the reasons they connect it to him. And they think that the head of the Sphinx looks a bit like Khafre, although I kind of disagree with that. But that's not a central point. I and my colleagues, Robert Boval, John Anthony West sadly passed away, Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University, Randall Carlson as well, are generally of the view that the Great Sphinx was originally a fully lion-bodied statue. And that it goes back more than 12,000 years, and I can explain to you why we think that.
Please.
That it goes back more than 12,000 years, that the head sticking up there, the lion head, was badly damaged and eroded, and that in pharaonic times, perhaps indeed in the Fourth Dynasty, perhaps even during the reign of Khafre, they remodeled the head and put it into this head wearing a classic ancient Egyptian pharaoh's headdress, which is called the Nemes headdress. But what we think is that there was a lion there before that, and there's a very special reason for that.
Why is that?
Well, there's two reasons actually. The first reason is the orientation of the Sphinx. The gaze of the Sphinx targets directly the rising sun on a very special day of the year, and that's at dawn on the spring equinox. That's when night and day are of absolutely equal length. The Sphinx looks directly at the point where the sun rises, and you can confirm that today, and I have done, by going on the Giza Plateau before dawn, stand behind the Sphinx, and you can see that it is looking directly at the Sphinx. And in fact, the Sphinx is perfectly oriented due east, and your monument must be oriented due east if it's going to target the rising sun at dawn on the spring equinox. The sun does not always rise due east. In the summer solstice, it rises far to the north of east. In the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, it rises far to the south of east. But on the spring, it's like a pendulum along the horizon. The spring equinox, spot on, due east. Now, the question is, in the ancient world, what was considered to govern the character of a world age was the constellation that lay behind the sun at dawn on the spring equinox. In our epoch, the 2024, the epoch of 2024, and indeed going back right to the time of Christ, going back to AD 0, the constellation that housed the sun on the spring equinox was Pisces, and it remains Pisces to this day. It will quite soon, within 150 years or so, be Aquarius that's housing the sun on the spring equinox. We all know the old song, we live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius. That's actually what it's all about. This effect of the constellation behind the sun constantly shifting as though it's a kind of roundabout that's going round and round behind the sun is caused by a wobble on the axis of the Earth. The Earth is our viewing platform from which we observe the stars. And that wobble causes the rising times of different stars and constellations to change in a very slow process. It's a complete cycle which unfolds over 25,920 years. And as a result of our observation platform being the Earth, and as a result of the Earth wobbling, we see the sun housed, that's the language that tends to be used, by a different constellation roughly every 2,160 years. So we've had Pisces for 2,000 years plus. We're going to have Aquarius. Before Pisces, it was Aries. At that time, the symbolism in ancient Egypt was all about rams. You know, if you just go to the temple of Karnak in Upper Egypt, you'll find that there's an avenue of ram-headed sphinxes which lead down into the temple of Karnak. Well, not those, no. It's the front entrance. We need to see the whole front of the temple. That one on the top left. Yeah, these ones. These are ram-headed sphinxes. These are celebrating the age of Aries. That's when Aries housed the sun at that time, at the time that the Temple of Karnak was built. Go back further and you'll find that Egypt's all about bulls. Why? Because before the age of Aries, it was the age of Taurus. It was the constellation of Taurus that housed the sun. You have to go back 12,500 years ago, before our time, to find a very significant constellation housing the sun at dawn on the spring equinox, and that's the constellation of Leo. That's the constellation of Leo. And to cut a long story short, what I and my colleagues think is that the Sphinx was originally constructed as a terrestrial representation of the constellation of Leo, that it targeted the constellation of Leo when it rose behind the sun. That's the first reason. The second reason is the geology of the Sphinx. And here the work of Professor Robert Schoch of Boston University is fundamental, because he has demonstrated, to the fury of Egyptologists, and has received a great deal of extremely negative criticism from Egyptologists, but he's a highly credentialed geologist. And he's stuck his neck out, looking at the erosion patterns on the body of the Sphinx, and particularly because the Sphinx has been constantly restored, particularly on the trench out of which the Sphinx was cut. You can see these deep vertical fissures and a kind of scalloped, rounded profile, and that is classic rainfall-induced weathering. And in Schoch's view, the Sphinx at some point in its history was exposed to more than 1,000 years of extremely heavy rainfall. And the bottom line is, such rains do not fall in the Giza Plateau today. They did not fall in the Giza Plateau 5,000 years ago, but they did fall on the Giza Plateau if you go back 12,000 years. That was the time when the Sahara Desert was green. That was the time when the world climate was completely different.
And this is what the attributing for the creation of Plato's lost civilization of Atlantis over 11,500 years ago.
Yeah, by the way, don't necessarily believe everything you read on Wikipedia.
So
Wikipedia is an agenda-driven
Even the founder says that. Yeah, I agree with that. Let me ask a different question. How many? I've seen you talk about the fact that you've climbed up the pyramid 5 times. I think you've said that, right?
Yeah.
And when you go there to the Sphinx of Giza, and you're there, right? The Great Sphinx of Giza. What do locals say when you talk to them? Is there a debate of what it is?
Well,
the
local name is Abu al-Hol, the father of terror, but nobody can really explain why. I've asked that question.
Is there any ideas, or do they have some kind of examples of?
No, nobody's ever given me
father of terror?
But that's how it's known. Yeah.
Have researchers given opinions why it's called the father of terror?
Not that I know of. No, it's just locally known. Anybody who lives in the village of Nazlet
father of terror in Arabic. The name is a reference of legendary Sphinx that would terrorize people by making them answer a riddle.
Yeah.
The Sphinx is a world famous monument that sits in front. So, but what
the people who live in Nazlet al-Saman, which is the village directly under the Sphinx,
yeah,
they can't tell you why it's called Abu al-Hol.
But how do they feel about it? What's their,
they're very proud of it.
In what way? Why are they proud
because
of
it's a beautiful, magnificent thing. It's 270 feet long. It's 70 feet high. It's
Hey, buddies, Some Nuts Guy here. Hope you're having an awesome day so far, and welcome back for another Dawncraft tutorial. Today, we are going to be talking about gems from the Apotheosis mod, how to add them to your weapons, how to do reforging of weapons, how to get the required materials, all things gems from Apotheosis mod. All right, let's go. So to do your gem crafting, you'll need a few different tables. The smithing table, which will be unlocked by defeating the 3rd boss in the main quest lines that you get from the Guildmaster. I've done a video on that. If you haven't seen that already, I'll link that in the description below for you. The salvaging table and the reforging table. Anvils are also important, but you'll have unlocked that already if you've unlocked the smithing table. So
back to another episode of Minecraft Mods Unlocked, and in this video, you're going to learn how to turn random purple rocks you find in the world into in-game powerhouses, and in less time than it takes to build an XP farm as well. I'll also walk you through how to get and upgrade gems, apply them, what each sigil does, how reforging and augmenting works, and much more. And be sure to stick around to the end of the video for one of my favorite armor setups using these gems. Alright, I'm Avo, and let's jump in. So before we get into the rest of everything in Apotheosis, first of all, we need to know exactly where to find the gems. And you can find them here, 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 or you can just find them in the towers that Apotheosis adds. So as you can see, when we go up this tower here, on the way up, there's a bunch of gems, and at the top, there's a booby trap chest that has 2 Apotheosis armors. And as you can see, this one actually has a socket, which we'll talk about more in a second. Now, before we talk more about how to equip gems into armor and tools, let's talk about the new world tier system that was introduced in 1.21.1. This system now makes sure that you can't get any rarity or higher rarity gems when you just start the game and you open the first chest with really good luck. Instead, the first affix item you come across will start a new quest, and that will enter you into the first tier of the world tier progression, which is Haven. To get to Frontier, you have to equip a full set of common armor plus 1 common weapon, and at this tier, invaders also start spawning. To reach the next tier, which is Ascent, you have to equip a full set of uncommon armor plus 1 uncommon weapon. Also, you can check the detailed info of each tier by pressing Ctrl and T at the same time, and then moving up to the detailed info button. To go from Ascent to Summit, you have to equip a full set of rare armor plus 1 rare weapon, and you have to kill the Wither. And finally, to reach the pinnacle, you have to equip a full set of epic armor, equip 1 epic weapon, and you have to kill the Ender Dragon. Alright, so now that we have all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about what each block in the mod does, starting out with the smithing table. And the smithing table just allows you to apply sockets, gems, and sigils. And to do this, you just grab whatever piece of armor you have. This was the one from the tower earlier. Just go ahead and shift right click, and then whatever gem you have, as you can see there, it's going to add plus 7.5% arrow velocity. So let's go ahead and throw that on there. And as you can see, it just applies it to the single empty socket that the leather cap has. Next up, let's talk about the salvaging table. Now say I actually hate this leather cap. Instead, I can throw it in here and it'll give me 1 to 3 leather and 1 to 4 time-worn fabric. And time-worn fabric is just the rarity material. So as you can see, this is uncommon. And if we were to take a look at the rest over here on the left side, this is common. We have the luminous crystal, which is rare. We have epic, and then the God-forged pearl is mythic. Next up, let's talk about the simple reforging table, and this allows you to reforge items up to rare. So if I were to take this diamond chest plate and just place it inside of there, and then grab some God-forged pearls, it's not going to allow me to place that inside of the simple reforging table. Instead, you're going to need luminous crystal shards, and then go ahead and shift right click, or shift left click, excuse me, into there. And as you can see, it'll give you 3 different tiers that you can select from. And what's really weird about this is just because this uses the most luminous crystal shards and the most levels, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best item. So take a look at all 3 of these whenever you're doing any type of reforging, and make sure you're actually getting the best deal, because sometimes this one will rip you off, and it's kind of disappointing, honestly. Now, the regular reforging table, just known as the reforging table, will reforge items up to mythic, which is the Godforged. So if I were to take some more Godforged, as you can see, it will take it in there, and then I can place my same chest plate in there, and as you can see, the Blast Forged diamond chest plate of adamantine, anyways, can be reforged into the spiritual diamond chest plate of health. And as you can see, it's much better, maybe minus the gravity. I don't know why on earth I would ever need that. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about the augmenting table. And if we take that same chest plate from earlier, as you can see, I went ahead and upgraded the blessed portion of the chest plate, which gives me max health. So this little number right here tells you what the range of max health is. So as you can see right now, I have plus 8 max health, which is the maximum, and plus 5 max health would be the minimum. Now we have this little drop down menu, and we can take a look at each individual attribute that the reforging table gave us. So if we take a look here, we can increase the amount of luck between 3 and 5, and you know, the gravity, I don't want to do that. And you can also, you know, check out the healing received. So if we take a look up here, the stat modifiers is the modifiers in blue, and the gray one, that is gravity. Those are called stat modifiers. The affixes are the words that are in yellow. So as you can see, the explosive damage taken is reduced by 20% is an affix. The stat modifier is the +8 damage or the +8 max health. So that gets the terminology out of the way because those kind of confused me, although I am easily confused sometimes. Now we can actually scroll up and down here using our scroll wheel, and not only can we modify our stat modifiers, but we can also modify the affixes themselves. So if we take a look here, projectile damage taken is reduced by 21%. And if we take a look up here, projectile damage taken is reduced by 21%. So that is the affix. But maybe we don't like projectile damage. Maybe we want something else. So instead, we can do the re-roll selected affix. So if we went ahead and just re-rolled this one, it will turn it into blockading. So now the physical damage taken is reduced by 7%. But what about the projectile damage? Let's go ahead and select that, which is deflective, and go ahead and re-roll that one. And now it's going to be when attacked, I will gain resistance 2 for 7 seconds. So basically what this does is it allows you to upgrade your stat modifier.
Towers over the Nile River. It looks out due east over the basin of the Nile. And fundamentally, because it is a worldwide icon, it's something that Egypt rightly is very proud of. Nobody else has the Great Sphinx of Giza. Plenty of people have got pyramids, but nobody else has got the Great Sphinx. So there's a sense of pride. There's a sense of pride for the whole Giza Plateau. That it's something special that Egypt has, which other cultures don't have.
What's the story that they tell when they're having kids and their kids go to school? What story do they tell on what happened there?
When I've talked to Egyptians, local Egyptians living in Nazlet al-Saman, they believe that the Sphinx is much, much older than the time of the dynastic Egyptians.
Really?
They believe that it's as old as time itself.
They believe it's as old as time itself. And why do they believe that?
Well, just look at it. That's why. Those erosion patterns around the side. There's a sense that there's a sense of feeling of great antiquity about it. Of course, they're not looking up encyclopedias and going into the archaeological textbooks. They're just giving a gut reaction to this amazing thing.
So when you talked about what it took to build a pyramid, right? The stats you gave, you said it's 6 million tons, 481 feet high. Correct. You can say it probably better than that.
I'll say it exactly. It does. The calculated weight is 6 million tons. The height is presently around 450 feet. But that's because the top 30 feet of the Great Pyramid came off in an earthquake around about the year 1300. So calculate the angle of slope, and it's 52 degrees angle of slope on each side, and project it further beyond the broken right now. 400.
What do we how studied and researched is it? And what do we not, I mean, I guess the question would be, how studied and researched is it? The pyramid.
Well, I would say that this is amongst the most excavated and most studied archaeological sites in the entire world. So it's amazing that they're still finding new things there. For example, there's been using a high-tech scanning equipment, muon scanning, I believe. Just in the last 3 years, enormous cavities have been identified within the Great Pyramid, which nobody knew were there. There's a huge feature, famous feature within the Great Pyramid called the Grand Gallery. And it looks like there's another Grand Gallery above it, which has been identified by scanning, but nobody's got into it yet. Yeah, you can see it in some of those. No, that's the Grand Gallery, but you can also see the scanning there.
Zoom in, Rob.
that you see there's the Grand Gallery, and above it is the Scam Pyramid's big void. Well, nobody knew that was there until very, very recently, and it's not the only void that's in the Great Pyramid. So we're still finding out about new things about the Great Pyramid. Now, that void could be an architectural feature. It appears to slope at the same angle as the Grand Gallery, or it might not be. It might just be. It's hard to understand why a sort of random vacant space would be left in this monument. But the fact is, all we know at the moment is that there's this huge cavity inside the pyramid that nobody has yet got into, and it isn't the only part of the pyramid. Out of the Queen's Chamber, so-called, when we call the chambers of the pyramids Queen's Chamber, King's Chamber, there's no basis for that. There's no evidence that any queen was ever buried in the Great Pyramid, nor is there any evidence that any king, any pharaoh was ever buried in the Great Pyramid, because no pharaonic burial was ever found inside it. But there's the Queen's Chamber, and on the right-hand wall and on the left-hand wall, there are two little shafts cut into the wall. Actually, those shafts were invisible until I believe it was 1872, when a curious British researcher went around tapping on the walls of the Queen's Chamber. He had a reason to do that, because the King's Chamber, I suspect that's the King's Chamber one. You could find their exit on the outside of the Sure enough, he found people didn't through, and lo and behold, there's a horizontal. It's about that high and that wide. Let's say 8 inches high and 8 inches wide. It's just very, very small. You can't get a human being in there. But back in the 90s, a special robot was designed, which was sent up there, sent up the southern shaft first. The journey of 6 feet, what it found was a little stone door with 2 metal handles blocking the shaft. So the question is, what lies beyond that door? A new robot was designed with a drill on the front of it. They send the robot back up the shaft. They drill a hole in that door. What do they see when the camera goes through that hole? They see a cavity about 4 feet wide and another door at the end of that, closed, shut. And of course, they've not been able to drill through that one yet. So it's the same story on the other shaft as well. So what we're getting is evidence that the Great Pyramid still has many secrets to reveal. Years of study. In some ways, you could say thousands of years of study, and you can definitely say 150 years of detailed archaeological study, have still not got to the bottom of the mysteries of the Great Pyramid. They've not solved how it was built. Many theories as to how it was built.
But this is roughly 2,000, 2,500 BC, right? Something like that.
Yeah, that's the establishment date for the construction of the Great Pyramid. I don't have a big problem with that date. I think in the Great Pyramid we're looking at a multi-generational project. I completely reject the notion that the Great Pyramid was a tomb and only a tomb, which is what Egyptologists say, and I reject the notion that this massive building your own. So he was on the throne for 22 years. Who's got a background in engineering and construction, who I've talked to, can accept that either. This thing couldn't be built unless there was some kind of extraordinary technology that the ancient Egyptians possessed, which we don't yet know that they possessed. It looks much more likely that it was built up over a long period of time, but that undoubtedly the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty finished it off and put the casing stones that were once on the outside of the Great Pyramid. But I'm of the opinion, and again this is just my view based on my own research and my own work, is that what stood at the Giza Plateau 12,500 years ago was the Sphinx in the form of a lion. Were some megalithic temples. There's a huge megalithic temple called the Bali Temple right next door to the Great Sphinx. again, there's nothing that connects it in writing that connects it to any particular epoch, but it has blocks of stone that weigh 100 tons each. Those are also heavily weathered, just as the Sphinx is. So my suggestion is that on the Giza Plateau, you have a number of megalithic temples, which still stand. You have the Great Sphinx, and you had ground platforms, not very high, where the three pyramids were built, laid out in a very specific, very precise angle to one another. And that precise angle matches the angle of the, yes, this is the Valley Temple, and what we're looking at there is exactly an interesting point, because you're looking at granite blocks that were put there in Old Kingdom times that face limestone. And it's those limestone blocks that are behind those granite blocks. You can see them if you look right to the back. You can see the limestone blocks that haven't been covered with facing stones. So just as we believe that the Sphinx was restored by the pharaohs, we also, I'm speaking of, I and my colleagues, are also of the opinion that the Valley Temple was restored by the pharaohs. But what they found was a much, much, much older monument, which they treasured and valued and venerated.
You've climbed all the way to the top 5 times, you said, right?
I have.
Now, let me ask you, when you climb all the way, are you tied to anything, or is it open like it's... Rob, can you... Because I just found a video of somebody climbing all the way to the top, and this is... Can you play this clip, Rob, the one I just sent you? So this is a fellow. I don't know who this is.
Yeah.
They posted this video. Is this literally what it looks like when you climb to the top?
You bet. That's exactly what it looks like. It's mountaineering to a certain extent. And
I mean, if you fall, you're falling.
If you're more than 20 feet up and you fall, you're pretty much certain to be dead. If you're 200 feet up, you definitely will be dead. And people die every year climbing the Great Pyramid.
How do you come down carefully? Because this is essentially 45 stories high.
Yeah. That's right. You come down. You come down very carefully. I was actually on one of the climbs that I and my wife Santha did. I was ahead, and I reached up to
You can pause, Rob.
some of the blocks. Some of the blocks
Right.
are only this high. Some of them are almost 6 feet high, and you have to pull yourself up onto them. The courses vary in height from course to course. And I was levering myself. I got hold of the top of the block, and I was pulling myself up onto that so that I could get my knees onto it and get on the top. When the limestone that I was holding, which was very eroded, broke off in my hands, I fell back. Fortunately, my wife was right behind me, and she pushed me very, very hard and stopped me falling. But that could have been the end of me.
I just searched right
Which
now.
many Egyptologists would wish it perhaps had been.
I'm sure they would, but I just searched the following. How many people died climbing the Great Pyramid? Okay. And the number shows 1,600, over 1,600 people have died climbing the pyramid in the last 200 years.
Yeah.
I can see that because if you fall 1, 2, 3, 4, you're not going to be able to stop yourself right
No.
there. I mean, that's
No, you
pretty.
don't. The slope is 52 degrees. It's a steep slope, and once you start rolling, you're gone. There's no, and that's what this is.
What do you feel like when you're all the way up there? Is there an energy you feel? Is there what when you're looking around? What are you thinking? What are you feeling when you're all the way at the top?
It's a magnificent, majestic place. There's first of all a sense of relief. I got to the top without.
How long does it
without
take on
falling.
average?
For me, about 25 to 30 minutes
Okay.
to do the climb. There was a gentleman, in fact, the gentleman who helped me with my first climb of the Great Pyramid, who's now passed away. He was known locally as Champion because back in the 1930s and 40s, people used to run races up the Great Pyramid. And he was able to run up the Great Pyramid and do the climb in 11 minutes. Well, I'm not as fit as he was. So in my case, about 25 minutes to half an hour.
That's still good though. I mean, to get
Yeah.
up in 25 minutes.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's really good.
So okay, play the other clip, Rob. The other one that shows the inside of it, and this is just kind of giving a glimpse. This is apparently what Harvard put together. Can you get out to kind of
Well, that's a good place to be, actually. That's a good place to be because that's Mamun. That's called Mamun's Hole.
Thanks to Harvard University, you can virtually now enter the pyramid. Okay,
Yeah.
can you show that, Rob? Go back and play the clip, and maybe you can narrate this for us while we're looking at it.
Sure.
Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, go back to the beginning. I need to explain to you what we're actually looking at here. Can I do that?
Yeah,
I
please
narrate
go
it?
for it. Yes.
What we're looking at here is the result of an Arab investigation of the Great Pyramid in the 9th century under a caliph called Caliph al-Mamun, who was very curious about antiquities. And he was already aware of other pyramids in Egypt in which the entrance was in the north face. As a matter of fact, the entrance to all Egyptian pyramids is in the north face. But at that time, the true entrance of the Great Pyramid was invisible because all of the sides were sheerly covered sheer with beautiful polished limestone facing stones, some of which individually could weigh as much as 16 tons. They were completely covered and closed the pyramid, and nobody knew where the entrance was. It seems that in ancient times there was a way to open that doorway, to open those facing stones and to get in. But nobody knew in the 9th century where it was. So Caliph al-Mamun got together a gang of workers with sledgehammers and chisels, and he went up onto the north face of the Great Pyramid, roughly where he thought the door might be, and he started breaking his way in. And what we're looking at here is a man-made tunnel physically forced into the Great Pyramid and generally known as Mamun's Hole.
Have you walked through this?
You bet. I've walked through it more times than I can count. And that now is the entrance through which tourists enter the Great Pyramid.
What floor is this on? Is this
Oh, it's about 25 feet up, maybe 30,
25 feet up? Okay.
30 feet up. But the true entrance, of course, has now been found, and it's a little bit above Mamun's Hole, and you can see that there are slabs of stone in a kind of that sort of shape, like an A figure, which block it. If you search for true entrance to the Great Pyramid, you can see it as well. It's a little bit above Mamun's Hole, but nobody who goes to the Great Pyramid today goes in through that true entrance. They all go in through Mamun's Hole.
Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. That's actually the real entrance to the Great
And
Pyramid.
are you actually able to go in through it?
No,
Is it-
because at a certain point, this is another of the curiosities, is that the internal passageway system of the Great Pyramid was deliberately blocked with gigantic granite blocking stones. So when the Mamun and his team broke in, they didn't know exactly where they were going, but as they'd got deeper into that that cavern that you were showing us, as they got deeper into that, hammering away, they suddenly heard something very large falling in a nearby space. There was a space nearby where something huge fell. And that struck them as interesting. They knew where the sound came from. They started heading for that. And they found themselves in what is called the ascending corridor of the Great Pyramid. And underneath them, behind where they cut in, were these huge granite not facing stones, huge granite blocking stones, which blocked that passageway. But they had gone round them and found themselves in the passageway system. And from there, it was clear running. They could go up the ascending corridor, they could enter the Queen's Chamber, they could then continue on up the Grand Gallery, and they could come to the King's Chamber. That was the situation once they'd broken in and found the original system.
So what did they? So this right here, Rob. Just if you don't mind watching it one time all the way
Sure.
through, just to kind of get a feel.
Yeah.
Rob, if you can just play this, go
Well,
forward.
What you're walking through is a man-made tunnel broken in by force.
Put it at regular speed, Rob. Go ahead.
It's a tunnel that was broken into by force, roughly hacked out of the body of the Great Pyramid, which fortunately accidentally led to this, which is the ascending corridor.
So this is not built. Man opened this up.
Yes, there's okay. This is the complications of the Great Pyramid are beyond belief. There's an ascending corridor, but there's also a descending corridor.
Were these stairs there, or did somebody build it?
No, those stairs have been put in modern
Okay,
times.
got it.
They did not
Right.
exist. Let's keep on going down. Let's keep on going down.
So we're going down now.
No, yeah, let's go down. Let's go down to the descending corridor. No, we're in the Queen's Chamber. No, we're not quite going the right way at the moment. We're going up. But there's two ways. You can go up or you can go down. And we did see the down view. There, this is it. Then you come into the so-called subterranean chamber, cut out of bedrock 100 feet beneath the base of the Great Pyramid. When you come up that, you then join the junction of that and the Grand Gallery, and you can then continue all the way up to the top.
How high does this route go? Like, are you going up a lot or not a lot?
You're going up hundreds of feet at a slope of 26 degrees. And by the way, that's worth making a point of too, because the external slope of the Great Pyramid is 52 degrees. And every corridor, every passageway within the Great Pyramid slopes at 26 degrees. That's, of course, half of 52. So we know that geometers and mathematicians were at work. It's not an easy... Once you get to the Grand Gallery, it's fine, because that's almost 30 feet high. But when you're going up the ascending corridor or going down the ascending corridor, you're in a passageway, I should call it. You're in a passage that is about 3 feet 5 inches in height. Now, that means that you're going to have to bend over double, pretty much, to go down it. And what I've learned from years of exploration of the Great Pyramid is that if you're going down one of those passageways, it's better to go down backwards. Because then you don't keep smashing your head on the top of it. If you go down forwards, you're going to bump your head 5 times by the time you get to the bottom. But if you go down backwards, that doesn't happen. Anyway, it's very difficult particularly for anybody who's unwell, to actually go up there.
Graham, when an archaeologist, Rob, if you can pull out what I just sent you, this is when you go to Egypt, this is their tours portal. But when an archaeologist or scientist...
Yeah, by the way, in the middle there, 1, 2, 3rd from left, in the rank below, that one there, that's a newly found passageway, as a result of which was identified by this scanner that has been opened up. It's above the entrance to the Great Pyramid.
Well, what I'm asking is, if an archaeologist or a scientist wants to go in there and investigate a team of 50, okay, just to find out what's going on there, is there regulation? Is there approval? Do you need permits? Like, what's the process to go in there and investigate? And
we are dealing with the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. Egyptian authorities do not take alcohol.
In what way?
Well, first of all, it's heavily guarded. And if you don't have permits, you're not going to get into it. Of course, there's a tourist traffic, but they have to get their tickets at the entrance, and they come in with a guide usually, and they're
Heavily guarded.
Yes, the Great Pyramid is guarded, and indeed rightly so, as quite a number of ancient monuments are.
So if somebody with a strong...
You can't just roll up there and start working.
Have you ever gotten an approval to go out there and investigate the pyramid with a team, or no?
No, I've not. I have had approval a couple of times to climb it. The other climbs that I've done were unapproved.
Unapproved.
Mm-hmm.
Middle of the night or throughout the
First climb that my wife Santa and I did was in 1993, and we started the climb at 4 o'clock in the morning.
You started climbing at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Mm.
Good for you.
We started
If
at
you
4 o'clock in the
invited me,
morning,
I
but
would never join you. I just want you to know. I would say, tell me how it is at the end.
I was only 43 years old then, and,
Okay, I
and
got you.
I was pretty fit.
It's not about the fit part. Middle of the night, you want me to climb up 450 feet that I'm not going to see nothing? Is there a light like do you see when you climb up the Majestic?
Yeah,
God.
majestic starlight. Is
So,
up there.
so this means if the Egyptian authority sees it, you're going to get arrested next time you go. I just want you to know that. If they, okay.
Absolutely.
But no, going back to it. Is there a fight for scientists and archaeologists? Who is this like? I climbed, Mount Everest. I did this, and I investigated this, and I went to the Amazon. Is this one of those things where if you're allowed to go in and you do get an approval, what are those approvals typical like? Are there restrictions? You can't go touch this. You have to have somebody that walks with you. What do those guidelines
well,
look like?
for example, Mark Lehner of the University of Chicago is a Western archaeologist who's been specialized on the Giza Plateau for many, many years. And I could say with confidence that Mark would have access to pretty much any point on the Giza Plateau where he wants to go. But still, there are limits. I know that there have been a couple of drilling projects around the Great Sphinx, ostensibly to clear out rainwater or groundwater from under the Sphinx. Not quite sure why those drilling projects happened. But it's very difficult to ground truth what the scanning has revealed, which is a large, regular chamber beneath the left forepaw of the Sphinx. If you go down about 15 or 20 feet, none of the drilling has gone to that point, as far as we know. So there are limits on what can be done. Nobody wants to see the Sphinx destroyed. Drilling around the Sphinx could cause destruction. And while we have excellent remote scanning facilities available, there's perhaps not a reason to do so. I would like to see it done, but I'd like to see it done with great care, because the Sphinx is regarded in many traditions, including in ancient Egypt itself, as a place where an archive of records was preserved from the remote past. But not everybody can just go there and work, and even those who are very experienced. I don't think it's about preserving. Sure that people who are there.
Egyptian archaeologists or others
Higher life, study of the Giza. I would say that Zahi has access to everything that he chooses to have access to. He's a very experienced man, and
what percentage of it has been explored? You know how they say less than 5% of the ocean
typically
has
in the case of the Giza Plateau, very close to the Great Pyramids, I'd say it's significantly more than that, but there's a lot that has not been
Could
excavated.
there be things in there that if we explored, it could help advance, society or civilization in ways that can help us reveal a bunch of secrets about life and what to do and what not to do? Do you think there's anything there, or
Well, that would be a speculation, but it would be a reasonably fair one. If you take my point of view, which is that we are a species with amnesia, that we have forgotten an incredibly significant part of our own story that unfolded during the Ice Age. We've forgotten it. And that there were certain places on Earth, and the Great Sphinx is one of them, and Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is another, where survivors of a destroyed civilization made their way, took refuge amongst local people, and passed on knowledge while at the same time receiving knowledge from those local people, and perhaps established these places as an archive, as a time capsule for future civilizations to decode. And that's not an entirely unreasonable point. The Great Pyramid itself is an archive of knowledge and information. You don't need to actually find papyri with writing on them pyramid can speak to you with its very precise orientation to true north, south, east, and west, with its shafts, which turn out to point at very specific stars in specific periods, and with its layout on the ground in connection to the other two pyramids, which matches the three stars of Orion's belt, not as they looked in 2500 BC, but as they looked in 10,500 BC. Again, there's this wobble on the axis of the Earth known as precession, which changes the orientation and the rising times of stars. And in the case of a constellation of Orion, over a cycle of 26,000 years, you see it go up and down vertically on the horizon, on the meridian, the north-south line that divides the sky. And the time you get the perfect match of the three great pyramids on the ground with the three stars of Orion's belt isn't when the pyramids are supposed to have been built. It's thousands of years earlier. It's 10,500 BC, 12,500 years ago. And that's the same time that the Sphinx locks to the constellation of the Bull. So I and my colleagues are of the opinion that this cannot be a coincidence, that this place is using the language of astronomy and powerful monolithic architecture, which is going to be very difficult to destroy, to pass down information to the future. That's why it's intriguing that when you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. When you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by the same number, 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. Egyptologists know this. They know that it's a case. They regard it as completely coincidental. And even my opponent in the debate I did earlier this year on the JRE, Flint Dibble, accepts that the ratio is correct. But he doesn't see any significance in the ratio. He just thinks it's an accident. But that number 43,000...
He's got a nice hat on. You got to give him credit for that.
You got to give him credit for that hat. It's a good hat. And he's a very smart guy. Flint is a very clever man, and he knows his stuff. But the point is that number is not a random number. Let me explain why. There's two things that aren't random. First of all, the Great Pyramid is clearly a monument that is speaking to the Earth. The Great Pyramid is oriented perfectly to the cardinal directions of the Earth, north, south, east, and west. It is a monument that is keyed in to the Earth in its cardinal directions. And secondly, I mentioned to you this phenomenon called precession, which changes the rising points of the stars as the years go by over a cycle of 25,920 years. The rate of change is 1 degree every 72 years. That's a tiny little thing on the horizon. That's the width of your finger held up against the horizon. 1 degree every 72 years. 43,200 is a multiple of 72. It is 600 times 72. You will find that number is a sacred number in cultures all around the world. Multiples of that number too. For example, 432,000, that's the number of syllables in the Rig Veda. 72, those are the conspirators who worked to kill the god Osiris at some time in the distant past. You find these numbers occurring in mythology all around the world. You find them occurring in architecture all around the world. So if the ratio of the Great Pyramid to the Earth was 1 to 60,000, I wouldn't make much of it. But here we have a monument that is locked in to the cardinal directions of the Earth and then gives you the dimensions of the Earth on a scale defined by a key motion of the Earth itself, that wobble of the axis of the Earth. To me, this is sophistication. This is not coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, it's, math, 72 times 600, 43,200, right? Syllables, 42.
432,000 syllables in the Rig Veda.
Yeah,
There's so many
pretty
other
wild.
examples.
So let's go to this basic stuff that innocent people this is not what they study on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
How were the pyramids built? If you go a little bit lower, this is an article when you go visit Egypt and you're touring, this is what they tell you. So here's how the pyramids were built. Go a little lower, Rob. They have different methods, so theories about how it was built. Go lower, Rob. So first one is called the ramp theory, then the water shaft. Right? When you look at the water elevators, I got pictures if you go low, Rob, and I want to ask Graham because this is his world.
These are all suggestions. These are all
suggestions and
Nobody
theories.
knows how it was built.
Right. If you go a little bit lower, go lower, and then you have this is one way where they were bringing it up. Okay, keep going. So when you look like that's another way. I mean, similar to the other one, the block placements of the pyramid.
spiral ramp, effectively.
Right.
lines around the
What
pyramid.
what is your theory of how it was built?
My theory is that ramps don't do it. If you have a straight ramp, which is leading up to the Great Pyramid, if it's going to carry blocks right up to what will be the top of the Great Pyramid, you're looking. No gang of workers can haul a 20-ton block up a slope that's steeper than 10 degrees. So you're looking at a ramp which is going to extend roughly a mile out into the desert. Furthermore, that ramp is going to have to bear the load of very heavy megaliths to be carried up. Therefore, the ramp itself has got to be extremely strong in order to carry that load. And the problem is, where's the ramp? Where's the remains? There's nothing there on the Giza Plateau to suggest that. And so that's why this idea of spiral ramps has been proposed. Various other suggestions have been made. But the truth is, as everybody will admit, is that these are all theories and that nobody knows how the Great Pyramid was done. I get it. There is no doubt that large numbers of strong men can haul very large blocks of stone on the level. They can, if they're on a horizontal surface. There are even images from ancient Egypt with hieroglyphs which show a kind of sled-like device with a very large statue on it. We might guess its weight at 50 tons, being hauled along by teams of workers. And on the front of the sled, an individual is standing there pouring water in front of the runners of the sled to make the sand slippery. And that would absolutely work horizontally. But the problem then becomes how you get those gigantic blocks much higher up. I don't think the ramp will be able to do it. And you have, for example, in the King's so-called King's Chamber, it is a roof series of granite blocks. Those granite blocks, by the way, they were brought from 500 kilometers to the south. It's roofed by a series of granite blocks, and those granite blocks weigh about 70 tons each. And then there are other chambers above the King's Chamber, which most people don't get into. I've been into them. There's 5 chambers, they call them chambers, and each one of them is also floored and roofed by 70-ton granite blocks. And a collection of 79 blocks, about 300 feet into the air, to put them where they are now. It's not going to be done with wet sand. It's not going to be done with sleds. And to do it with ramps, I think, is extremely unlikely.
Relieving chambers?
Yeah,
You said there's 5 of them?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. The top one is 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5. And the first one there, 5. There's 5 chambers there. I've been in all of them. The one at the very top, under that gabled roof, that is one of the reasons why. Am I close enough to the microphone? I'm not sure.
No, we hear.
That's one of the reasons why Egyptologists feel confident in saying that it was the work of Khufu. Because in that top chamber, there is what is known as a royal cartouche. Each pharaoh, the name of each pharaoh is surrounded by a kind of oval device called a cartouche. And in that cartouche is roughly written this is considered to be a quarry mark that was put on the block at the time the block was quarried. You're looking at a cartouche on the left there, but that's not from Khufu's. Well, that is actually Khufu's cartouche, I think. But what you want to see is the one in the relieving chamber, because that is the single piece of writing that Egyptologists rely on to attribute the whole of the Great Pyramid to Khufu. There's a whole other argument. How was that first discovered in the modern era? It was discovered by a British explorer called Howard Vyse. And Howard Vyse in the mid-1800s was a vandal of the worst kind. He blew a massive vertical hole in the southern side of the Great Pyramid. Just scarred it, tore it to pieces with dynamite. And he dynamited his way into those relieving chambers as well. Now, Howard Vyse was suffering from real serious financial difficulties. He'd not made a significant discovery. He was £10,000 in debt, which was a really bad thing to be in the 1800s. And he had to come up with an amazing discovery. So there have been suggestions, which Egyptologists do not accept. There have been suggestions that Howard Vyse actually forged that cartouche, and he put it there in order to
come out and say, here's what I found.
Here's what I found.
Hey, this is why it's worth funding my next project.
Exactly, and it made his career.
How much fraud is there in archaeologists where they have to make up something for them to get credibility in their writing so they can sell more and get another raise or ask for more money when they're giving lectures and all this other stuff. How much, you know how they say there's 70% of art is fraud? How much fraud is there in archaeologists?
I would like to say not too much. I would like to say that. There is, of course, some fraud in archaeology. Human beings are human beings, and it can happen. But archaeology is a profession that polices itself pretty well. If a fraudulent claim is made, it is going to be exposed pretty soon. And I think particularly around world famous monuments like the Giza monuments, I would be very surprised to see much example of fraud. Of course,
Damn, I just pulled up an article. Check this out.
Yeah, there it is.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's it. That's the cartouche in the relieving chamber, and that is the sole piece of written evidence which Egyptologists rely on to attribute the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, to Khufu. This is one of the ways in which the Giza pyramids are different from later pyramids. Giza pyramids are all attributed to the 4th dynasty. Go to the next dynasty, the 5th dynasty, and you're going to find pyramids like, classic example is the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara. That's Unas. The interior of the Pyramid of Unas is completely covered in hieroglyphic inscriptions naming the pharaoh Unas. There's a massive amount of inscriptions. But the exterior of the Pyramid of Unas, as you can see there, is a mess. Now, you would have thought if the Great Pyramid was built 50 or 100 years before this, that they'd carry on improving. You wouldn't have thought they'd devolve, build something like the Great Pyramid, and then 50 years later build, or 100 years later, build this mess.
So what happened?
Well, it seems like the ability to build pyramids was confined to a very specific period. And when they'd stopped it, they carried on building pyramids, but they weren't building them to the same standard, but they were doing something different. They were placing inscriptions inside them in detail, which do not exist in any of the Old Kingdom
This
pyramids.
is kind of like we were better at landing on the moon 60 years ago than today.
Kind of like that.
Yeah,
but
makes
but
sense.
but it's interesting because you normally do see a continual evolution, but in this case, you definitely see a devolution.
Which, in a sense, it doesn't make sense. When
Yeah.
I say make sense, it doesn't make sense. Okay, so let me ask you this. Let's say Graham Hancock is given a unlimited budget and you're hired as the lead guy to go. I just looked up right now, only 10%, less than 10% of findings we've explored of the pyramid. That's what I just saw. If you were given a unlimited budget, open checkbook, a team that you get to put together, and ample time to go investigate everything you can about the pyramid, what would you do?
Well, the first and most important thing would to be ensure that whatever investigation took place did not damage or destroy anything of great importance. This is something that's not often realized about excavations. When you excavate a site, you effectively destroy that site. So it had to be a very careful project with people who were very committed and in fact loving towards the Great Pyramid to undertake that project. But were it to be possible, were such a team to be assembled, who we could be sure would not cause unnecessary massacre inside the Great Pyramid, then my first priority would be to investigate what is in those voids. They're all being within the Great Pyramid. Are there other chambers? And if so, which have never been accessed ever by anybody since the pyramid was built? I hope perhaps we will see that happen.
There's anything revolutionary there? About history.
Well, I suspect there might be, because it's clearly great lengths were gone to make these places very hard to access. Just like the shaft of the Queen's Chamber that I told you about, which goes, it's like an invitation. It's please investigate me, please explore me, please find out about me. But we are going to set you a series of hurdles that's going to make it very difficult to do that. You've got to earn the right to investigate me. And now that we have this scanning technology, we're getting to the point, at least in terms of our science, we've earned the right to ask the pyramid questions and to get answers from it.
Last time Randall Carlson was here, we went and we talked about all this stuff, and he's like, Pat, we haven't even talked about ancient civilization, Atlantis. And I'm like, oh my God. I said, we're out of time. We went for a couple hours. I really enjoyed talking to him.
Yeah.
I said, next one, we got to do something where we get into it. I think when we talk to you guys, an hour and a half is not enough. You need 3-4 hours when you talk to me, right? But going into lost, ancient civilizations that are, many different words we can use with them. We hear Atlantis. I've heard you talk about India, Japan, a couple other places. where are we at now? Are we at a place that the establishment and the anti-establishment is united on the fact that yes, these places exist?
No,
Really?
not at all. The establishment archaeology regards Atlantis as a joke and doesn't take it seriously at all. The view of establishment archaeology is that Atlantis was a fiction made up by the Greek philosopher Plato. The earliest surviving reference in writing that we have to Atlantis, in writing that we can read, is the work of Plato. And it's in the dialogues known as the Timaeus and the Critias. And he speaks about this great civilization based upon an island, which was at one time nurturing, kind, gentle, loving, but as gradually became delirious with power and began to impose its power upon other peoples around the world. And eventually the universe struck it down with this enormous flood, and Atlantis was submerged beneath the sea. Now, Egyptologists reject all of this. There is also a mention of Athens in the Atlantis story as it's passed down to us by Plato, and archaeologists in general rightly point out that there was no Athens at that time. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself because the time is important as well. Unlike many ancient myths, Plato's story of Atlantis actually contains a date, very specific date. Here's the provenance of that story. A famous Greek lawmaker called Solon traveled to Egypt around 600 BC. And Solon did a kind of tour of Egypt with a translator. And on that tour, he stopped off at a temple in the Delta dedicated to the goddess Neith, the temple of Sais in the Delta. And there he saw enormous inscriptions on the walls, and he asked local priests to translate those inscriptions for him. And those inscriptions told the story of Atlantis. Atlantis is not an ancient Egyptian word. We're looking at a word that made its way from ancient Egyptian into Greek. We're getting a Greek word with Atlantis, not an Egyptian word. But that word was the result of a translation done in 600 BC by a priest for Solon. And that translation told the story of Atlantis. Okay? And then Plato inherits that story, and he embeds it into the dialogues of Timaeus and Critias. So here's the point. The priest that gave the translation to Solon asked him, when did this happen? When was Atlantis swallowed up by the sea? And the priest replied, quite matter-of-factly, 9,000 years ago. That's where we need to do the math. Solon was there in 600 BC.
Level 5.
So we're now talking about 9,600 BC, which is 11,600 years ago, give or take 20 years.
Right.
And that turns out to coincide exactly with what is called meltwater pulse 1b. There was an enormous rise in sea level at that exact time, around 11,600 years ago. So if Plato just made up the date that was given to Solon, it's extraordinary that it coincides with the latest geological evidence on meltwater pulse 1b, when islands could have been swallowed up by the sea. This is the...
But Krem, how hard could it be to... I mean, if you look at the patterns on the way it would be in the middle of the ocean, whatever the location would be, how hard is it for archaeologists to say, yeah, that makes sense. Something could have been here.
Well,
what is their argument to say that?
It's very hard for them to say it because it means admitting that there was a lost civilization, which is something that archaeologists don't want to do. However, they say that the reason they think it's a fantasy is because Athens is mentioned in it, and there was no Athens then, and because it appears to be trying to teach moral lessons. That it's a sort of moral lesson about how a society can become overconfident and overproud and be brought down. I get it. I get that. But what they don't do, and what they should do, and I've never seen this done in any critique of Atlantis, is they do not they certainly do understand, but they do not inform others that there are roughly 200 myths from all around the world that speak of a global flood, of a global cataclysm that submerged and destroyed a prior civilization. And I think the Atlantis story has to be seen in context of those global flood myths. So certainly I believe that Plato drew the idea from an ancient Egyptian original. But he then used that idea to make political points as well. But the idea itself isn't a unique or rare idea. It's found in hundreds of flood myths all around the world, and Atlantis is one of those flood myths. So I'm actually very sure that Atlantis is a genuine story. Exactly where or what Atlantis was is something that requires further work. But one important development is that there is one temple in Egypt that's left standing which still contains the Atlantis account. The temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta no longer exists. But the temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt has inscribed on its walls what are called the Edfu building texts. And when I first started working with those texts, I was working with translations that were done in the 1960s. And they were partial translations, but they talk briefly about a primeval homeland of the gods, which was an island, which was struck by something like a serpent that came down out of the sky and split the island, and then the island was swallowed up by the sea. There were survivors. They headed off in all directions, and some of them came to Egypt. And there in Egypt, they built what are called primeval mounds. And those primeval mounds were to be the basis, the foundation of all future temples and pyramids that would be built in Egypt. The problem with the Edfu building text is the Temple of Edfu is a Ptolemaic temple. It dates to about 280 BC, and that is after Plato. That's after Solon. But there's two things clear, that we're looking at a body of information that was preserved on the walls of a number of temples, of which the last surviving is the Temple of Horus at Edfu. And secondly, those words, the language that is used in the hieroglyphs of the Temple of Horus at Edfu is not the language of 280 BC. It's not Ptolemaic Egyptian. It's Middle Kingdom Egyptian. It's language that's 2000 BC. And states quite clearly that what they were doing was making permanent, by carving them into the walls, material that was in the ancient archives of the prior temple that had stood on Edfu. It turns out that the latest version of the Temple of Edfu is indeed only the latest version, that it stands on the foundations of an older temple, which stood on the foundations of an older temple, etc., etc. The archives were preserved, and in Ptolemaic times they were permanently put on the walls of the temple. The Middle Egyptian is important, the antiquity of the language in which these are inscribed in Ptolemaic times, and the fact that there is a reference to 7,000 years ago, this great flood. And when you add 7 to 2000 BC, you get to 9,000, very close to the date that was given to Solon. So I think that Egyptologists and archaeologists should be a little more generous and perhaps a little more open-minded in looking at the Atlantis story, and above all should connect it to other traditions of civilizations destroyed in a global flood.
Okay, I want to give you two things I want to show. One,
that's the Temple of Horus at Edfu.
Yeah, so Rob, can you play that clip and tell me how accurate this is with what you think of this, of the Atlantis? Go ahead, Rob. So this is, if you want to hit the volume as well, go ahead.
This is the Rishat structure you're looking at.
Yes.
Yeah. Sahara, actually be the lost city of Atlantis. Plato's legend of Atlantis has long occupied the minds of everyone, from scientists to skeptics, with many locations being cited as a possibility for the location of this sunken civilization. However,
I'm not in a place now where I'm going to say the Rishat structure was Atlantis, because it isn't an island, and that is very clear in Plato's story. A very large island was said. But secondly, the Rishat structure may be extremely interesting, and goodness knows what it has to tell us. I've not been there, and I don't like sort of pronouncing on places that I've not seen and studied myself. So if I were asked to put money on it right now, I would put money on the Rishat structure being natural. If I were able to go there and investigate it firsthand and have boots on the ground, I might change my view. But right now, I don't have enough information to say that this is a man-made structure.
Do you have an idea of where you think it's at?
Well, again, it's provided by Plato. It's west of the Pillars of Hercules, west of the Straits of Gibraltar. It's in the Atlantic Ocean. Oh, it's in Mauritania. It's in Mauritania in West Africa, the Rishat structure.
Got it.
It's on land and never been underwater. Not in the last few 100 million years, anyway. But I don't want to diss it. I understand why people find this intriguing. It's an intriguing looking structure, my God, and it does resemble that ring structure that is accorded to Atlantis. So I won't, I refuse to write it off completely, but at the same time, my work is under such hostile scrutiny by so many archaeologists at the moment that I'd be foolish to put money on something that I've not even seen for myself.
I was on my way to Vegas. I was hoping to get it out of you, but it's okay. So I'm on History Channel right now on their website. It's 6 theories about the Atlantis. Number one, Atlantis was a mid-Atlantic continent that suddenly sunk into the ocean. This is the whole Plato theory. Number two, the Atlantis was swallowed up in the Bermuda Triangle. That's number two. Number three, Atlantis was Antarctica. That's what this was. So this is the 1958 book, Earth's Shifting Crust.
Yep.
Albert Einstein, right? Okay.
Well, Albert Einstein wrote the
Forward.
introduction,
Yeah, he
but it
wrote
was
the
by
forward.
Charles Hapgood.
Right.
Yeah.
Number four, the story of Atlantis was a mythical retelling of the Black Sea flood. Okay, so that's one. And then next, Atlantis is the story of the Minoan civilization which flourished in the Greek island 2500 to 1600 BC. And the sixth one is Atlantis didn't exist at all. Plato invented it.
Yeah. That pretty much sums up the theories about Atlantis. None of those theories take account of the fact that Atlantis is a flood myth and that it is part of a global tradition of flood myths. I don't think that any of them provide a satisfactory example. The most interesting thing is that there are a number of places in the world which were radically changed by sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age. It is possible that one of those places was in the mid-Atlantic. When there is a phenomenon called isostasy, where you have huge ice masses, and you did have enormous ice cap over North America, everywhere north of pretty much Minnesota, all the way up to Canada. The weight of these ice masses, which were at the peak about 2 kilometers deep, would have been enormous. And it pushed down on one. It's like a seesaw. You push down one bit, you raise up another bit. And it's possible that the Mid-Atlantic Ridge may have been higher as a result of the weight of the ice caps. That's called isostasy. Then when the ice caps come off, the seesaw shifts the other way. And what was above water ends up underwater. It's not only sea level rise that's involved, it's the mechanics of the Earth itself and the way that it's a slightly elastic surface that will allow weight to shift one thing. So for example, in the UK, where I live, there was an ice cap on northern Scotland during the Ice Age, and that pushed northern Scotland down, and it pushed the south of England up. That's why the Isle of Wight in the English Channel is now sinking, because the ice cap's no longer there and the seesaw has gone back the other way. So we've got a combination of sea level rise and isostasy. It is possible, but there are other intriguing areas of the world. There's the Sunda Shelf, that's I mentioned earlier, the landmass that now on maps is the Malay Peninsula, the Malaysian Peninsula, the Indonesian islands. That landmass was all one landmass during the Ice Age. It wasn't a peninsula, it was a series of islands. It was called, geologists call it the Sunda Shelf or Sunda Land. And that was submerged very rapidly at the end of the last Ice Age, changed everything completely. So that is an interesting area to look, and I know a number of Indonesian researchers who Indonesia might have been the site of Atlantis for that reason. South India, fascinating. In Tamil Nadu, which is actually where my wife's family comes from. I'm fortunate to
Really?
be. Yeah, my wife was born in Malaysia, but she's of Tamil origin, and she speaks fluent Tamil. So we were able to do a series of expeditions in southern India, talking to people about their traditions there. And it turns out that there is a deep and ancient tradition of a land called Kumari Kandam in southern India. A land that extended south from the tip of southern India, that Sri Lanka was not an island, that it was joined to India, and that parts of this land may have extended as far south as the Maldives. And there are traditions about sophisticated civilization there, which had academies of learning. They called them sangams. And this too was submerged in a global flood, and the date put on it is roughly 11,500 years ago. Meltwater Pulse 1b, the same sort of thing. So there's a number of candidates around the world for this. There we are, Kumari Kandam. That's the idea of it. And of course, archaeology won't have anything to do with it, but there it is.
Well, you said something when we talked about advanced technology. Like, well, I don't know about the advanced technology and, what they. I'm not saying they had planes and they had this and they had that, but how did they find the Antarctica back in 1300? We say they found out about it in 1820s. It's a valid question to be asking, right? So, do we have any insight or research or proof on the types of technology that may have existed in the past?
Well, yes, we do. This is one. This is one of the points that archaeology tends to skate around. Look, first of all, there isn't a single shipwreck that's been found anywhere in the world that is older than 6,000 years. The oldest shipwreck so far identified is the Dokos shipwreck from Greece, and it's about 6,000 years old. And you can go down from there to other shipwrecks about 3,300 years old in the Mediterranean. There's an intact shipwreck at the bottom of the Black Sea, which is about 2,400 years old. It's intact because there's no oxygen down there, almost 2 miles deep, and the timbers have been preserved. Yeah, that's the Dokos shipwreck. And 2,700. It's a bit older than that in my view. But anyway, that's the oldest known shipwreck in the world.
So where are you
And
going
this
with
is used as an argument against a lost seafaring civilization of the Ice Age. The argument is, oh look, if there was a seafaring civilization that was able to map the whole Earth during the Ice Age, surely we'd find some of their ships. And the absence of ships is taken as proof that there was no seafaring civilization. Now, this is puzzling because archaeologists universally accept that human beings were using ships 50,000 years ago. For example, it would have been impossible to settle the island of Cyprus, even at the peak of the last ice age, even when sea level was at its lowest. It would have been impossible to settle it by land because it was always an island. Cyprus is surrounded by great deeps. You could only have got to it by ships. None of those ships have ever been found, but we know for sure that human beings were living in Cyprus at least 12,500 years ago during the Ice Age. And the studies that have been done suggest that quite sophisticated ships must have been used, that there were planned settlement of Cyprus, that people numbering 1,000 or more were moved over to Cyprus from the mainland in a series of expeditions. They brought animals with them. They had to have a population large enough to avoid extinction. You go with too small a population, and they may become extinct within a generation or two. So everybody accepts that Cyprus was colonized by sea during the Ice Age, but no ships have survived. That doesn't dispute the fact that it was colonized by sea. Same with Australia. Human beings were in Australia at least 50,000 years ago. And even at the peak of the Ice Age, when the whole Sunda Shelf was still above water, you got as far as Timor, and then you had to sail. There's a 90-kilometer gap between Timor and New Guinea, which would only have been covered by watercraft. And again, no watercraft have been found, but that doesn't invalidate the fact that human beings got there. So the absence of shipwrecks from, quote unquote, my lost civilization of the Ice Age doesn't worry me, because there's absence of shipwrecks much, much older, which, in theory, if we've not found shipwrecks from 50,000 years ago, that means that nobody settled Australia. But people did settle Australia.
So what's your point when you go on that? When I ask you a question about what type of technology that we have and what proofs are there, you're saying that,
I'm saying that even within established archaeology, it is accepted that sophisticated navigation technology existed 50,000 years ago. Ships,
specifically ships. Okay. What else?
Ships which were capable of carrying not just 2 or 3 individuals, but dozens or hundreds of individuals.
What else? What else do we have proof that existed back in the days where, we can sit and point to it and be like, wow, it's pretty interesting. We used to have this back in the day. That's pretty wild. What else do we have? Proof of technology.
Well, I think the Great Sphinx is one of the surviving remnants of that period.
Is that technology, though?
Well, yes, it is, because the Great Sphinx is cut out of natural bedrock. And I mentioned to you a megalithic temple that stands right beside the Great Sphinx with blocks weighing 100 tons or more. Those blocks came out of the trench around the Sphinx that was excavated around the Sphinx to create the body of the Sphinx. So this was a culture that was able to cut 100-ton blocks out of the bedrock and move them over and build them into a temple.
What are some speculations of what it could be?
Well, again, this is a subject that mainstream establishment archaeology avoids as to how this was all done. And they keep going back to the wet sand and the sledges and the teams of men. And some people will even say slaves were involved in moving the blocks. Although there's no evidence of slavery in the Old Kingdom in ancient Egypt, by the way. There's no really good explanation for it in establishment Egyptology. In ancient Egypt, Egyptian myth and tradition, which are mirrored by many myths and traditions around the world. And this is where I get myself into a lot of trouble with archaeologists. There are traditions of priests singing blocks, singing megaliths into place, huge blocks of stone being raised up into the sky by priests chanting. And I just wonder whether that's some faint memory passed down over the millennia of some kind of sonic technology that may have been used to lift blocks. But that's purely a speculation on my part. I have no proof of that whatsoever, but I don't think Egyptologists have got any proof either of how some of these things were done.
What's the movie? There was a movie that showed the types of technology that may have existed years ago, and then there was an explosion or a meteor that hit, and then boom, we started all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Do you at all subscribe that being a possibility?
Well, that's precisely the possibility that I think we're looking at. I think that there was a higher level of technology, particularly in shipbuilding, than is supposed to have existed. Navigation, exploration of the world, longitude, precise astronomy that is not supposed to have been discovered until the time of the Greeks, say 2,000 or 2,300 years ago, but which was present during the Ice Age.
Yeah, because when you see some of the stuff that we're building today, and how advanced we are right now, and it seems like the last 4 years, the acceleration of advancement is just out of control.
Out of control. It's really rapid acceleration.
Does that concern you or no?
No, because it's the nature of human culture. Human cultures can stay stagnant for centuries, and then they can suddenly leap forward. And we're looking at one of those sudden leaps forward in our time. I mean, even within my own living and working memory, when I started out as a journalist in the 1970s, there were no computers. I was typing on a little portable typewriter. When I made mistakes, I would use a thing called Tipex to paint out what I'd typed and type over it again. And you had a carbon copy at the back. And it was very slow and laborious. And if you wanted to get their detailed academic information, you're going to have to definitely go to a library and access that information there. But within those years, since the 1970s, that's all changed. Now we have incredible access to resources of information through the internet. And as a writer, I find the word processing technology incredibly useful. I first got onto it about 1982. That's when I got my first computer. And it was like just an amazing liberation. I don't have to Tipex out anything else. If I don't like that word, I can just remove it and replace it with another one. It made the writing process much less physical and much more visceral. You just get right into what you want to say, and if you want to change it, it's so easy to change it. That's a change in our lifetime. Look at the whole thing of artificial intelligence that's happening right now. We are going through an inflection point in the human story, and the question is, will we survive it or not? I'm less worried about the technologies like AI than I am worried about the well-known technology of nuclear weapons. That technology worries me a lot. Because the fact of the matter is that we are living at a point of so much hostility and so much hatred and so much anger in the world that it is not impossible that nuclear missiles will be fired, perhaps even within our lifetime. And why does that happen? That happens because the leaders of the world, the governments of the world, they all have the psychology of 14-year-old teenage males.
Why do you say that?
Because they're just constantly engaged in warfare and anger and ego contests with one another. They are not their level of consciousness is not mature enough to have the ability to control weapons that could destroy the whole of civilization in a single day. We have put in the hands of these naughty teenagers the weapons of gods. And that is a very dangerous place to be. We need an elevation of consciousness amongst our leaders in order to make the world a safer place. And perhaps the first thing that would happen with that elevation of consciousness would be less hostility, less fury, less anger, and an elimination entirely of nuclear weapons. Nobody has nuclear weapons because they want to attack other people. We have nuclear weapons because we think we want to defend ourselves. But what a terrible way to defend ourselves if it means that humanity dies out completely. It's obviously an insane idea. Well, it was called MAD, mutually assured destruction. And that is a result of a state of mind that lives in fear and that has not fully conquered its own emotions and is unwilling to seek friendship when hostility is an easier option. That was fine when we had swords and spears. It was even fine when it was just machine guns and rifles. But now that we've got nukes, it's not fine anymore. And we're possibly the first civilization on this planet that could be responsible for its own complete destruction. There would be survivors, if there were survivors from North America or Britain, Northern Europe. They'd be wise to take refuge amongst the few remaining hunter-gatherer populations in the world today. Because the one thing about hunter-gatherers is that these are people who know how to survive. Those of us in technological societies, many of us haven't got a clue about how to survive. We just don't know how to do it. And we'd be psychologically destroyed by the collapse of our civilization. We would fall to pieces. The only people in the world who would pass through such a disaster relatively intact would be, for example, the hunter-gatherers in the Amazon rainforest. And I'm kind of suggesting that's what happened at the end of the Ice Age too. Just as we would take refuge amongst hunter-gatherer communities, perhaps share with them some of what we knew, at the same time they're sharing with us what they know so that we can survive in their jungle. I think the same thing happened in the past too.
Are you open to the idea the next time Randall comes on that we do it together for 4 hours?
I'd love to.
Okay, so why don't we do next time together for Rob? The next one, let's do the three of us. Let's put it for 4 hours for us to just free flow and go into different topics because I just had a what is it when you just feel like this has happened before?
Deja vu.
I just had deja vu. I'm like, I want both of you guys here to have this conversation together. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think
Randall is a genius in my opinion.
I mean, listen, the stuff we talked about with Randall we went one topic on Freemason and we stayed there for like 40 minutes. And that's not even why he was here. I don't want to talk about Freeman. I wanted to talk about other things. But because he's a 32nd degree or something like that, we stayed on that topic for a while. And
I believe he's a Mason,
yeah, I believe his mom. And my first sergeant in the Army used to be one, so I was always fascinated by them.
I'm not a Freemason myself. I've known a number of Freemasons over the years, and those I've known have always been very open-minded, inquiring individuals.
Me too. I have good experience with them. I don't know anything. I'm a math guy myself, and to me, when I think about more people who want to use logic to make their argument, I support it. I think it's great to be able to use that. Meanwhile, to be able to question stuff. Anyways, it is a pleasure to have you here. We're going to put the links, Rob, to the books and the shows.
Yeah, well, just to spell that out, I hope people will watch my season 2 on Netflix, which launches on the 16th of October.
Yep.
And that's season 1 we're looking at there, but season 2 launches on the 16th of October. Please look at my website, grahamhancock.com, which also will have all the links. It has the links to my video fact-checking Flint Dibble. It has the links to the only talk that I'm going to be giving in the USA next year, which will be in April in Sedona. By the way, that might be a good time to do this joint show with Randall that you're talking
Fantastic.
about. I'll be here next year.
Then let's do that. Let's
April
look at
19th
April.
and 20th.
I know this is in Austin, but this is the second.
Of new things that is in Ars Nouveau. Look at this guy. It's so cute. I'm Chosen Architect, and this. So very handy if you're wondering what a specific thing does. Having that documentation, honestly, I just wish every mod did this. Now, thankfully, because of all of our looting that we did last episode, I don't really have to make any source stone either. This is actually one of the more painful things that you have to make because it does cost a lot of stone and the original source gems to make this.
but we can kind of just skip right to the good part. Because if I remember correctly, the only thing we're going to need is an arcane core. We're going to also need an enchanting apparatus. And then we're just going to need basically 4 arcane pedestals. And you don't need, like I said, the entire, like, it's, I mean, it's at 26, but this should go higher. Oh, we got 30% there. That would be a really nice thing to have on us. Okay, so now we have we could ever want is right down here. This is a great start. Like, what a great little cave. Ooh, I found some runic deep slate down here. Okay, so that gives me some runes. That's from Forbidden as well. Very, very nice. But look at these sneaky diamonds that are back here. Look, they're hiding now. They think they're getting away. What this will do is any finished product will go into the bottom here, and the lectern will automatically pull those into our storage. So we don't have to worry about emptying this. But we put the ingredients up here. And if we set this in our config, we can have auto pull right here, auto input and auto output turned on. Have the top be the input, which inputs are usually blue in color, and then output on the bottom, which is usually orange. Step. And that is going to be the episode. And then Amazing Thanks is going to go out to Zane. Thank you so much for your amazing support and choosing to support me. I'm Chosen Architect, and this it is a balloon on a stick tied to a lead, and I don't ask me how it works, but it is a modifier. Something to note, that base modifier being 3 is the same as the highest tier capacitor that you would actually, believe it or not, Ender IO might be one of the best. Now, whoa. Hear me out. The reason I say it's the best is because the generator, the Sterling generator, if you've looted, is actually really good. And yes, I know you're probably screaming at me that the wind generators from Mechanism are definitely great, and I will admit they are fantastic. But I am getting kind of bored of them because I end up using them a lot in just about every mod pack nowadays. And like I said, with Ender IO, if you've looted any, you may have these capacitors. And that base modifier that is on here, the higher the number, the more power that the Sterling generator will produce. And the Sterling generator
This is what I'm in right now. I haven't talked about this publicly. When the Americans are bombing the hell out of Dresden, there was a historical cultural art museum there, and one of the Maya codices was being held there. And one of the young boys working at the library, he was told to go gather some of the artifacts and bring them down in the basement to protect him. And one of the first ones he grabbed was the little Maya codex. And he grabbed that and held onto it and protected it through the bombing. And he's the dude that later on cracked the Maya code and learned to read that codex.
This is Luke Caverns. He's an anthropologist, archaeologist, and is on the hunt for lost American civilizations. And today, he reveals the secret of Incan technology, from their impossible masonry and pyramid construction to why Machu Picchu may have been an ancient college for understanding the world.
There's a city called Vilcabamba that the American explorer Hiram Bingham was looking for. And Vilcabamba is the city that the last Inca emperor fled to. This is where the story gets interesting, because Hiram Bingham was looking for that in the Peruvian Amazon and accidentally found Machu Picchu. He never found the city of Vilcabamba.
This episode is fascinating. We touch on a lot of ancient civilization and ancient technology, but we go all across the board discussing history of the Mesoamerican tribes, all the way from Central America to South America, and no one is better to talk about it than Luke. He is a fantastic storyteller and extremely knowledgeable, and I mean, this guy's dedicated his entire life to this topic. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed having it. Without further ado, sit back, relax, and welcome to camp. Luke Caverns, how are you, sir?
What's up, man? We've been talking about doing this for way too long.
Too long. Honestly, I mentioned to you in our text that our initial DMs are now ancient history.
Yeah.
Truly.
I think we've been talking since like 2023.
Let the record show. I'm an OG Luke Caverns supporter. And maybe at that point you're already pretty popping, but I mean earlier than Rogan. You know what I mean? I was watching
way before.
I was watching before you went on Rogan. You know what I mean? I'm a real one. But yeah, dude, I'm just like a casual anthropology nerd. and I love reading anthropology books. And then, of course, by the work of Graham Hancock and folks like him, I have become fascinated with ancient civilizations. And I think similarly, and you much more, in a much more robust way, have really taken that on as like a life calling to actually go to these places and dig into not only what you can see and feel and sort of like touch by being in these places, but also the actual data and like science behind it, right? Having like an anthropology background, you can actually be like, okay, here's what's really going on. And I think you straddle a really cool lane for, I think, younger generations of like explorers that are excited about the world. And I think ultimately answering like the biggest questions about what humanity is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, who are we? Where do we come from? Why are we here? And then the biggest question that I don't know if any of us can answer is where are we going? But we'll focus on the first two for now. So I'm curious. You had even mentioned in the text, which is so funny. You're like, dude, I'm happy to be in New York. I was like, really? You're like, yeah, bro. I'm mostly in different countries where I can't really speak the language, and I'm trying to like get by.
Yeah.
So you said that you were recently in Peru.
Yep.
And where in Peru? In Lima?
I was in Lima for a couple days, and then I've spent most of my time in Cusco.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what brought you down there? What were you going to go look at?
So usually, I work for an organization called the Maya Exploration Center, and basically we just take people on like adventure travel tours, and while I'm there, I spend a little bit of extra time wherever I'm going and researching things that I'm interested in, making videos for YouTube. And then a couple times a year, I just travel somewhere completely on my own, nothing to do with touring or anything like that. So that's why I was there. And then my poor wife, I still haven't taken her on a honeymoon in like 2 years. So that was like, it was like our second pre-honeymoon. So I took her to Peru. She just, I was telling you, she graduated from dental school, and so I took her with me.
She paid respect.
Yeah.
Now that she's a doctor, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I was down there researching the Inca and all the crazy stonework that's in Peru, and just taking some people around Peru. Yeah, I love it down there.
Yeah. What can you tell me about the Inca?
Oh gosh, man, there's so much. We know a lot about the Inca. Essentially, they seem to appear sometime around like 800 AD. The kingdom of Cusco emerges in the current day city of Cusco, and they start out as a kingdom, and they exist in this really fertile valley. They call it the Sacred Valley, and so you got these terraces. Have you ever seen the terraces in Peru? It's like essentially they square out a part of the mountainside, and it'll go. I mean, dude, literally goes from one horizon down to the other, from the bottom of a mountain all the way to the top of the mountain, and it's just farmland, like these lines of farms. And so they're raising a lot of potatoes here. I mean, they're making so much food in ancient times that they can feed like 20 million people just in this little valley. And so the kingdom of Cusco, which are the Inca people, they control that. And so over time, all that wealth bubbles over, like it just like the pot overflows, and they eventually become an empire, and they take over all of Peru. And so Cusco is just an incredible town. I think that the most interesting thing about the Inca world that everyone is obsessed with is the stonework that's there. So maybe you've heard of or seen Sacsayhuaman, which is the stones that are like, I mean, there's some stones that are so big you couldn't fit them in this room.
Right.
Just absolutely gigantic. Nobody really knows how exactly they cut them or shaped them into the shapes that they're in. It's just so enormous. And then down inside the city, there's stonework that's not this large, irregularly shaped polygonal stonework, but it's we call it imperial style, and they are square or rectangular stones that are just perfectly cut alongside each other. And it's the greatest stonework in all of the ancient world. Like you think Egypt is good. Once you go to when you go to Peru, you're going to see stonework there that just, I mean, dude, it just completely, other than one or maybe two temples in Egypt, just completely outclasses. There's just you can click anywhere. There's all different kinds of stonework. So that one right there, that's the 12 angled stone. That's the 12 angled stone at the palace of Inca Roca, and it's just amazing. So they call it granite, but it's actually gray andesite, and it's just the precision with which these things are cut or they're shaped is just it's really amazing. And seeing it in person is quite it's just quite mind blowing.
I mean, it's remarkable. Like, how big are these stones specifically? Like
This
the cuts
stone-
of these?
This stone is probably a similar size to this table.
Wow.
Yeah. Probably the face of it. Now, I would say it goes in maybe 2 feet or so. So it's about the size of this table. It's about 2 feet thick. And then all of the stones are just perfectly aligned to every stone around them. And there's not one stone in all of the Inca world that is, there's no 2 stones that are identical. So they're all shaped to fit alongside the stones around them. And it's just amazing, man. I mean, so when I guess the place where the mystery comes from with these is it's kind of like if you go to the Inca realm or if you go to Egypt, there's the debate whether did the Inca really do this or did this happen a long time ago, or thousands of years ago. Did the Egyptians really do this, or did this happen thousands of years?
Pre-kingdom empire.
Was there a prehistoric civilization that did this?
What's up, people? Let's take a break really quick because I want to talk to the fellas. Let me ask you something. Are you stuck? Do you feel like you're struggling with work or relationships or maybe your marriage, or just feeling like you're not like the dude you want to be? You ever just, thinking to yourself like, man, I should be farther along right now. I just get caught in these cycles where I just kind of lose self-control. Well, here's the thing that nobody likes to admit. It is possible that porn might be part of the problem. Now, yes, I know, I said the P word. Now, look, I don't want to be overly moralistic here, okay? But if you're someone that struggles with pornography and, research has shown that regular porn users actually leaves men feeling more anxious and less connected and ironically less satisfied, and then it creates a cycle that then you got to be a little secretive about, and you tell yourself, like, oh, I'll quit, and then you come back to the same cycle, and now you're in a trap. Well, that's where Relay comes in. Relay is a therapist-backed app with actual clinicians designed to help men quit pornography and actually feel better and get control of their lives. And the difference with Relay is that you're not doing it alone. With Relay, you basically join a small group of guys that are kind of on the same road. They're sharing accountability and encouragement and actual tools to help when triggers hit and you're feeling, anxious or alone. Relay helps you feel a little more connected. And you can stay totally anonymous, but for the first time, you're not going to be in this battle alone. I mean, think of it like a gym membership, but with your brain and for your habits and for the future of your relationship, maybe, right? Thousands of men and their families are already seeing some change because the men in their lives are a little bit less stuck. So if you're feeling stuck, check out Relay. Don't wait another month to be the man that you want to be today. And you can break the cycle with Relay. So go ahead and use the code GAGNON, GAGNON, for a 7-day free trial if you feel like this thing has just got a grip on you that you're not able to let go. That is Join Relay, JOIN, Relay, RELAY.app, app/camp, and use the code GAGNON for a 7-day free trial. Don't put it off. Be the man you're supposed to be today. Now let's get back to the show.
The way the wedge that initially starts that conversation, at least in Peru, was you had Spaniards who were there early on, and most Spaniards were just invested in conquering these native kingdoms and plundering them for all their gold and everything. And then there were some people, like there were friars and priests and stuff, that actually cared about the natives and wanted to convert them to Christianity. And then you had some people who, maybe like me and you, you and I don't really, having a bunch of gold would be cool, but I'm not really in the place in society where I can take advantage of that. I'm also not like a priest either. I'm not baptizing people, but I can see the significance of these people, and we should know more about this, like just a general interest in that, in the history and the anthropology. There were people there that had those interests. So one of them is the son of an Inca princess and a Spanish, I forget, was he a captain or he was a general? Anyways, his name was I wanted to say Gaspar de Carvajal, but it's not him. It's Garcilaso de la Vega, and so he's the son of an Inca princess, and he essentially writes this account of his childhood up until the point he was like 18 or 19, or maybe he was 21, that he grew up in the city of Cusco. And dude, it's a book that's like this thick, this big. It's a huge book. And it's called The Royal Commentaries of the Incas. And it's essentially him talking about his childhood. And there's all these strange things that he talks about. And when he talks about the stonework up at Sacsayhuaman, he says that the Indians that were there, and I'm using the term Indians because that's what he says. He says the Indians that were there would speak of that the gods, or that a race before, like a earlier people, had placed these stones here. That the stones had always been there. And then they speak about underneath Sacsayhuaman, he remembers going into a place that was called the Chincanas, which was this huge tunnel system that would go underneath Sacsayhuaman. So you have Cusco here, and up on top of this hillside is this fortress of Sacsayhuaman. And so they're both in Cusco, but he talks about how there were these tunnels that you could enter in up at Sacsayhuaman and go underneath the city of Cusco, and then from there these tunnels would go out into the Andes, so like under the ground for thousands of miles. I mean, or hundreds of miles at least must have been. He talks about that. There's so much more that he talks about, and that other Spaniards talk about, and that people in, I would say, so that book came out in 1609. There's another account written by like an anonymous, we don't know who the author was, but it's a Jesuit chronicler from the year 1600. And then there's Cieza de Leon, I think in the 1650s. He wrote this account of Cusco. And there's several others, but they just give you these glimpses into things that were going on in Cusco. And like, it'll just be one sentence. He'll say, the Indians say that the stones had always been there, or something akin to that. And there'll be multiple instances. And then they just move on. You know, and it's like they don't even realize that they just wrote down like this huge mystery. Right. And so by the 1800s, over 200 years later, people go back and read this and they're like, wait, this is weird, right? And so from the 1800s, well, people have been looking for the Chincanas, this tunnel system, since the 1800s. But there's all kinds of other things that people are looking for almost 200 years now that are highlighted, or at least spurred on to us from the Spanish chroniclers, that tell us that there's something more here than just like, oh, the Inca made this, right?
That's interesting.
So that's where this whole mystery starts. That's why people are interested in Peru.
I've heard similar things about that, like sometimes the New Kingdom Egyptians will talk about, Giza or any of the other pyramids, and they'll say, oh yeah, this came from the people of Horus, or something to that effect. And it's like, oh, are they referencing Old Kingdom Egyptians, which is, 1,000 years ago or whatever? Or is it from the proto-society that, But it's a similar kind of phrasing where like these stones have always been here. Like these stones are from the people that were before us, which you can imagine if you are this guy, ethnically, obviously was mixed, like Spanish and Incan, but I would imagine that they would have some type of reverence for their people, and they would say like, no, we did this. So I'm curious where that comes from, right? Like, is it almost more respectful to your culture if you say like, oh, this came from before us, or is it an actual historical account that, oh no, this was already here and no one really knows how it happened,
Yeah. So this is something that's happening right now with the Chincanas. So there's multiple teams in Cusco that are looking for these tunnels. And in fact, I'm the face of the English-speaking campaign, like the crowdfunding to do this. We just launched it last week, and then I'm working on a video for the Cusco's Ministry of Culture right now, like a crowdfunding video. But it's highly debated over who actually discovered them, or who is supposed to be able to get the credit, because the team that I'm working with is the team that's actually licensed by the Ministry of Culture to be carrying out these excavations. There's another team that's not licensed to be able to do this. And the reason that the feud happens is because the team that's not licensed, or they don't have the permits or whatever to be able to dig for the tunnels and scan for them. It's a very complicated subject. I don't know all the details of it, but apparently it's because their motives, the team that doesn't have the permit, is they believe that it was a lost civilization, a pre-Inca, maybe pre-Peruvian native culture, right? And then so the Ministry of Culture in Peru is like, no, your whole objective here completely insults our ancestral heritage. Like, why would we give you this permit to be able to do this when you don't even think that we did, like the indigenous people did this, right? And it's kind of like where that comes from is it's a backlash for the complete annihilation of the native world, right, during the colonial period. So now you have people there that are completely 100% full-blooded Inca, still speaking Quechua, the language, and they're tired of. And there's a lot. I should say there's a lot of white people that work on this other team that wants the permits. So they come in looking for something, and they're saying, "Yeah, we want to come into Cusco and dig here, but we don't think that the Inca are responsible for this." And the Inca are like, "Excuse me, you know." So it's kind of like you have a lot of this race, cultural
Politics getting in the way of
yeah.
actual good archaeology and good history.
Yeah, and it's kind of like as someone who I know a lot about ancient Egypt. It's like my I don't know, like a passion of mine, right? But I'm educated in, and I would say my specialty is the pre-Columbian world, like native studying Native Americans, and in the time I've spent studying it, I've to learn to kind of sympathize with that. Like, I first would sort of roll my eyes at like, you did this. And so I spent more time learning about, the colonial world and everything. And I realized, like, okay, this actually is very hard. Like, looking for something that, looking to find this answer to this ancient mystery, and then not even being open to giving credit to the ancestors of the native people who live there, is bizarre. Like,
Right.
and the more I get into it, the more I'm like, that kind of is a colonial mindset. Like, okay, I get it now. And but it took years of me being in it for it to sort of set in. But then you have the backlash of like, people say that way of thinking is like too woke, whatever. It's like,
Right.
well, man, history is really, really complicated,
Yeah.
really nuanced.
I've heard it said that history is a different country. You know what I mean? That like if
Yeah.
you try to ascribe like your modern day morals onto it, it's like, dude, it's a different world. It fundamentally, like ethically, was completely different. And by trying to politicize it and then letting that get in the way of the working world seems like would be fraught with issues. And that's why I like the way you're approaching it. It's like, no, let's just actually figure out where these things are, what they were used for, and from that we can create them, right?
Yeah. It's something that I I think it's possible that the Inca are not responsible for everything that's in Cusco or at Sacsayhuaman, Machu Picchu. There's a lot of amazing stonework there, and there are Spanish chroniclers that talk about the Inca giving credit for the stonework to some precursor people, right? They say that the stones were always there. There's even mound sites. I think there's a great example. In the eastern United States, there are giant mounds that are out here on the East Coast.
Is this like the Serpent Mound?
Serpent Mound plus a million others.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a million, literally a million others. And there are European explorers going through North America. This is very I never see podcast people talking about North America. But there are European explorers going through that learn to communicate with the natives, and they say, "Who built these mounds?" And the natives go, "The gods made them. The mounds were always here." Okay, well, that doesn't mean that it was. Yes, it does mean it was entirely different civilization, but archaeology has showed us when we excavate it all that the people who made those are the ancestors of these people 5,000 to 9,000 years ago, right?
Wow.
So not the same civilization, a completely different people, but ethnically they are connected to each other.
Right.
And so what I think is happening in Peru and what I think is happening in Egypt is it's the Egyptians calling back on ancient Egyptian world and like hearkening back to it. So it was always the Egyptians that did it. It wasn't like a precursor people that are of a completely different race. And for the Peruvians, for the Inca, when the Inca are saying, the gods built these were always here. Well, they're probably hearkening back to an even more ancient Peruvian civilization, right? that's what I think is actually happening there. So it's really a mix of both.
That's fascinating. I
yeah.
guess. Yeah, that's actually a great distinction. That the Inca is almost a nationality, right? Like that's like a federalized version of the people that are there, and they built an empire. But then there's an ethnic heritage of whatever you want to call that. It's just the people of the land, right? Like
yeah. And the Inca are latecomers. They're
all right. This is 800.
Yeah,
AD.
this is 800.
There were people there for however many thousands of years before that.
The earliest evidence that the earliest evidence that is recorded, that they found archaeological evidence for. But here's the problem: is that it would be like trying to get the permit to do huge excavations in New York City to try to find like the most ancient evidence of habitation. You know how hard that would be to do that here? Like how much of the infrastructure you'd have to dig up.
It's impossible.
So they found a little bit of evidence of people as far back as 2,000 or 3,000 BC in Cusco. So people have been living there for a long time because it's a very advantageous place to live. Like people identified it thousands of years ago that it's a great place, and people just always live there. But those very first people were not Inca, right? Like the civilization of Cusco did not exist. It's the prehistoric precursors to what will eventually become later on.
Likely the ethnic ancestor.
Exactly.
That's a great distinction.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way I feel about Egypt. Is it's like, so I'm sure you've heard the conversations of Zep Tepi and the King's List, and the King's List goes back 27,000 years ago, and then some people will say, well, this is, the Egyptians talking about, they have this 27,000 long year history, and they come from this ancient civilization, so there was another people that did this, and often that gets wrapped up with Atlantis, but there is a distinction between, like, Zep Tepi is not Atlantis. Those are two different things. Yeah, it's very interesting. I was having a conversation with Julian about this, and he has a good saying where he's like, yeah, when we talk about history, the further back you go, the less details you know. So it becomes really easy to skip centuries like this. But if you were talking about the 1900s, man, you could study your whole life and not fully understand the 1900s. It's funny how cavalier we talk about. That's just 1 century ago. It's weird how cavalier we are about like 47 centuries ago.
I was just talking to an Egyptologist, and he was like, "Oh yeah, there were some pharaohs in this period. They didn't rule for very long." And I was looking at like the dates of like the listing of the pharaohs, and it was like 7 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, that's a whole presidential 2 terms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Imagine if you were just like, oh yeah, Obama didn't rule very long. You'd be like, no, I mean, it was a massive moment in U.S. history. It really meant a lot to the people.
Exactly right.
And you just kind of brush it off like 4 of those in a row. Like, yeah, these guys didn't matter.
Yeah, and there's so much nuance there.
Yeah.
Was this the Egyptologist you had on the show?
Yes. Dr. Manning. Yeah. So I'm curious with the tunnels specifically in Cusco. Do we know of any of them? Have any of them been discovered with LiDAR?
Not yet. No. Well, okay. So they're running GPR, so ground penetrating radar, and they see pockets in the ground, but they're deeper than they think. And so as they're excavating down, they keep running the GPR inside the excavation hole, and the cavity is still below them. So they're trying to find it.
Is it possible that with this GPR that's like an aquifer, or like is it possible?
Yeah.
Okay, so they might just be drilling into the ground. Like, oh, we're gonna find a tunnel. And they're like, we found the water table.
Yep. Yeah, it's very possible.
Yeah, that's tricky.
And yeah, they're just like throwing darts in the dark. Like, no one has seen these tunnels since the Spanish chroniclers. Nobody really knows what happened to them. Like, there's all kinds of stories from the early 1800s to like the 1980s of people who supposedly saw them, people who were supposedly taken into the tunnels, but yet they're always sworn to secrecy. They say they saw things in them, and they can never talk about where the tunnels were. But we know that they're. I feel very confident in the fact that they're real. Garcilaso de la Vega, like the way he talks about settling them, the details are very exact, and he doesn't harp on it. He doesn't make this big thing out of it.
It's okay, obviously the tunnels.
Exactly. It's the way he talks about it. Now, if there were a whole chapter, and he's going on and on and on about how amazing it was, and how cool it was, and blah blah blah. If he's really building it up, then I might be more speculative. But no, he's just kind of like mentions it as if anyone would know about it, right?
Does he mention what they were used for?
No, he doesn't mention what they were used for.
Could you speculate?
Well, every pre-Columbian site, I shouldn't say every, Pre-Columbian sites, major ones, are built over natural caverns in the ground. So when we call them tunnels, my guess is they're modified caverns. When the Inca just go in and renovate it and turn it into a huge thing, right? And like maybe they do actually make tunnels that branch off from this cave system. Ancient pre-Columbian cities a lot of times are built on the top of caves, and we don't really understand why. You ever heard of Teotihuacan? The Temple of the Sun, Moon, Temple of Quetzalcoatl, or the Temple of the Feathered Serpent.
Yes.
Huge pyramids in Mexico. Those are built over cave systems. There are caves at Chichen Itza. There's a there's a cenote right underneath the Great Pyramid at Chichen Itza.
Cenote?
Yeah, it's just a different kind of cave. It's like a sinkhole where, probably millions of years ago, the land basically just falls into this hole in the ground. And there's these huge rivers that go in the ground. Anyways, it's a cave. And then there's a site called Yaxchilan that's got caves like the pyramids are built onto these hillsides, and in the hillsides there are caves inside of them. There's another site called Balam Pu that has this amazing cave underneath. It's like this mouth that opens up in this Maya temple. It's in Campeche, Mexico. And this mouth opens up and you go down into this cave, and they say it goes like 500 yards back. And it had all these barriers in it. And oddly enough, when I was there, they told me that no one had been in it since 1995. These are very sacred things. But man, it's literally all over the pre-Columbian world that sites are built over the top of massive caves. Why? Oh, the site of Mitla is built over Mitla, Mexico, is built over a cave, which is a modified cave that's turned into tunnels and labyrinths now. And there's another, Francisco Borgoa, who was a Portuguese explorer. He went down in those caves in like 1674, and he says that like the wind would whistle through the tunnels, and it was so cold it would blow out their oil lamps. And they said that the smell was so putrid that they thought that it must have been the gateway to hell. And so they covered up all the entrances to the tunnels and built a church over it. And so now a team there is trying to find the tunnels, the entrance to the tunnels. So all over. Now, we're talking about Cusco. That's in Peru.
Right.
But Mitla is up in Mexico, right? So it's all over the Americas that when Native Americans find a large cave system, they build a city on top of it. And man, we don't know why they did that.
That's fascinating.
But it's such a universal thing. It's just everywhere. Everywhere that there are caves and you can build a city on top of it, it happens. And we don't really know why exactly that is. There's so much speculation. Because the way that a Native American in Central America, which is like Mexico and Central America, might view a cave will be inherently different than a Peruvian might view a cave. In Mesoamerica, they call them Xibalba or Lioba, which means the underworld.
I
So
know
they
that
thought,
from Road El Dorado.
yeah, and so they thought that it was like a gateway to the underworld. And so you would have underworld priests that would go down there and perform rituals of which we don't really understand what these rituals were. Or the king might, if it was a civilization that had kings, and it would kind of go back and forth between like a priest class and just a king, and that's a fascinating discussion in itself. But we think that the king would go. He might be wearing like a certain garb, and he would go down into the underworld and perform some kind of ritual, and come back up wearing something different, and take part in some kind of parade to do something, and for some kind of significance that we don't understand. It's like, dude, it's just a completely lost world. The pre-Columbian Americas, it was a insanely sophisticated world that was just completely eviscerated by disease. And we lost all of the context to this. I mean, you walk around a Maya city, like I could take you to a place called Yaxchilan. It's awesome. It's like being in Indiana Jones there, or more like Tomb Raider. It feels like Tomb Raider. And you're walking around these temples, and you know that the people who built these temples are incredibly intelligent, and that every single little detail of the temples is important, and we don't know anything about it.
What a shame.
Yaxchilan starts in about... despite what some people might think, we actually have a pretty good timeline for the ancient Americas, because they did a really good job of making it pretty easy to carbon date things. So and to know the chronology. So like in Egypt, they built the pyramids in such a way where the pyramid could be robbed. You could go in and out of the pyramid, right? If you could put a body in it, if the pyramid was a tomb and you put a body in it, which is highly debated, and I have a particular opinion on this that I have not met anyone that shares, but we can talk about it
When we get to Egypt, we'll get into that.
But the Egyptians didn't do a very good job of building pyramids for. Wow, this is actually something I haven't thought about. Like if they wanted to build a pyramid that was just a tomb, and no one could ever break into the tomb, they could have done it. They could have done it the way that the Mesoamericans did. So anyways, the Mesoamericans, what they would do is the pyramid would start out half as tall, and the king would live in the palace on top of the pyramid, and then when he died, his palace would be turned into a tomb chamber, and he'd be laid to rest in it, and they build the whole new pyramid on top of it. So it was impossible to break into. So it was completely preserved forever. So we know when we break into that tomb chamber and you date his bones, you know exactly how old this guy is, and you know exactly how old the pyramid above him must be, right? So we have a very good understanding of the chronology of Mesoamerica. So Yashulan here begins about 200 AD, although there were some people living there before that, but like the kingdom really grows from there, and it goes until about 850 or 900, so about 700 years. And
this is Mexico.
Mexico, yeah. Along the Usama River, so right across the river. And so think about this. This is something I think is crazy. Is like this civilization starts in 200 AD and it falls somewhere around 800. That feels like it's kind of recent to us. But what I've learned is when I studied the pre-Columbian world, that's exceptionally far away because they fell 600 years before Columbus arrived. Like an entire civilization rose and fell, and then 600 years will go by, and these jungles are being covered up, or these ruins are being covered up by the jungle, and then Columbus arrives.
Wow.
So like that happened hundreds of times to hundreds of different civilizations throughout the Americas, where they would rise and fall, and it would be nearly 1,000 years or thousands of years until Europeans would arrive.
We might be closer. I mean, I have to check my math on this. We might be closer to Columbus today than they were to Columbus when they fell.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if it's 1492, right? Like it would be like not far off. Which when we think about Columbus, we're like, oh, that's ancient history. These people were twice as old.
When
they fell.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's remarkable.
There's so much.
And what they were building in 200. I mean, even just these buildings here are just like
it's
unbelievable.
It's amazing. Well, in the Maya world had already existed for well over 2,000 years leading up to this. So it's the pre-Columbian world is just amazing, man. It's so dense. There's so much mystery, and there's so much that we don't understand. Like, and that's why my answer to a lot of things about the pre-Columbian world will be like, well, this is what I've seen. This is what it's like when you go there. But ultimately, I don't know. It's actually a lost world.
Right.
It's just a lost world.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because you need help pitching your tickets. Yes, and that's what we do over here at camp. Maybe you're in line waiting for a concert somewhere and you just need something to read. Who knows? Maybe you just like squeezing. And Blue Chew is going to help you lay it down, okay? It's got all the active ingredients that are in like Viagra, Cialis, but this is the chew, okay? And this amazing service that's coming straight to your door. And for the listeners of this very program, they're going to get their first month of Blue Chew for free. All you need to use is the promo code GAGNON, GAGNON, and you'll have them gagged. You know what I'm talking about. You know I'm saying, my boy. So go to bluechew.com and try the promo code GAGNON, GAGNON, and you're going to get your first month free. All you got to do is pay $5 for shipping. That's like a coffee, okay? So to skip your morning cold brew and instead get that hard brew for an entire month. Yes, that is at bluechew.com. Use the promo code GAGNON and start laying it down like they deserve. Let's get back to the show.
And the cool thing about the Maya in particular is that they all share, they're kind of like the Greeks. So it would be an oversimplification to say that ancient Greece was all one civilization, because if you were to go, they all realized that they worship the same gods and they sort of have the same way of life. But Athens and Sparta really didn't get along. Corinth really didn't like either of them either. And so it's kind of like, they all don't really like each other. However, they all kind of have the same
I mean, the
culture.
Cretans today, you know what
Exactly,
I mean? Like,
exactly.
they would barely call themselves Greek.
Exactly. And so the Maya world is exactly the same way. Exactly, precisely the same way. So when we say terms like Maya civilization, they probably wouldn't see it that way. Not
Right.
necessarily during all periods would they see it the same way. So it's like every single city that you go to in the Maya world, you have to treat it in some ways like its own individual civilization, because it had its own kings, it had its own royal family, they have their own history. It's incredibly dense.
So when people say Maya, what are they really saying? Like, it's just like the broad.
It's the broad term of that whole Yucatan Peninsula down into Guatemala, all the way down to the Pacific coast on the other side, down to El Salvador and Honduras. It's this giant section of Mesoamerica, or Mexico and Central America in modern terms. And essentially, what makes people Maya is they worship this collective group of gods. And well, there's a bunch of them. We could go through all of them, but it kind of doesn't matter. But they worship the same collective group of gods, and they have the same way of life, but they all have a different local language. However, they would all ascribe to one. How do I even say this? It's like a collective language, but it was written. So you would write in hieroglyphs. So all Maya hieroglyphs are the same language.
Interesting.
However, it would be like, okay, I'm from Texas and I would speak Comanche. You're from
Florida. I would
but
speak Seminole.
yeah, so Seminole. And so, however, you and I have agreed that we're both going to speak, that everyone's going to speak Cherokee also, so we can communicate with each other. But when I'm at home, I'm going to speak my language. When you're home, you're going to speak your language. However, we can all also speak Cherokee. And so we've all agreed that we're similar enough that we shouldn't be, that we're similar enough that if our land got invaded, we're still going to have our scuffles and our fights and maybe our wars and battles. But if someone who's not anything like us attacks us, we'll all come together, right? So it's kind of like the Greeks. Like, all the Greeks come together to fight Persia. Well, the Maya kind of come together to fight outside threats as well. So the Maya world and the Greeks, like, if you want to know how to think about the Maya, just think of the Greeks. It's exactly the same.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, utterly, completely, exactly the same, actually.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've even spoken with like Native Americans, and they'll be like, yeah, like the term Native American like just doesn't even like it's a descriptor for just all people of the Americas. Like it's like it's a non-descriptor, right? It's like calling like everything in the ocean a fish. You know what I mean? Like it's generally right, but like you're missing so much nuance.
So much, man.
So I don't want to get off topic really quick on the Peruvian stones, because there's something that I've heard with the notches.
Okay.
I'm curious what your theory is with like the notches on these stones. Would you mind pulling those back up, Christos? Thank you. Like on these stones, I've heard like, oh, these notches maybe were used for framing the other stones that they were cutting out, and that they were used to basically almost act as like a stencil so that all of them would fit perfectly together.
The next photo you'll see. There you go.
So like these like nubs that you see, and that perhaps they all had these nubs, and some were shaved down, some weren't. I'm curious, do you have a thought on this, or have you read anything that you thought was compelling?
Yeah, it's tough, man. Because again, like I'm a cultural anthropologist and like historian. So I study the way people lived and the way they interacted with their environment, and then I just studied like the cultural history. So this is like engineering.
Right.
You need like an engineer's eye to look at that. But my guess is I have seen these things all around the world. Now, the popular ones are Peru and Egypt, but I was just in Cambodia, and I saw it on the Cambodian pyramid of Kokher. Massive pyramid, and it had these nubs. My guess is that if you have generations upon generations of people who are working this kind of stone, and they're moving things that are this heavy, there's got to be something about that nub that you would, like, if I gave you 500 years to learn how to be an expert stonemason and I gave you no tips at all, no advice, you just had to figure it out, and you were living for 500 years, I think something would happen naturally where you would end up with that nub. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
It's like there's something about the way we're wired and the way we interact with stone that you mess with that thing long enough, that's going to come out.
That's useful.
I don't know exactly how. My guess is it's a pivot point. I don't know why. With there's two of them on there. If there's two, I don't know if it's two pivot points necessarily, but I know it'd be a lot easier to drag that stone if you just had those 2 points like this on the ground and you're dragging it, rather than if you're dragging the whole thing, right? Because it'll move much more easily on those 2 points. You can also turn the stone, right? So if you had it bound with ropes, you could spin the stone around and leverage it. But why in so many places you'll see so many nubs that just never get shaved down? Man, I don't know. I do not know.
Are some of them shaved? Like, do we know that? Like, oh, there was likely a nub
No,
there that got shaved.
I mean, we don't know that. I don't. Maybe if I stared at like every block I ever see on a wall where there's nubs, I might find something. I don't know if there's anyone who's done this.
Right.
But no, we just assume that there had to be other stones that had those that get shaved down and flattened because. Okay, so at the Pyramid of Menkaure in Egypt, it's very, 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 very similar to this stonework right here. At least these large lower gray andesite stones, and they're all pillowed out. And then you can see on one part where they're coming across and they're flattening all the stones and getting rid of this pillowed effect, and then they just stop. And it just ends. It's like all the workers just put down their tools and never worked on it again. And in Peru, we see walls that are like that as well. So we just assume that there were definitely stones that had those nubs that just, for whatever reason, never got shaved down.
Fascinating. And is there a theory or a couple theories as to why they're so different? Like, none of these stones, like you had mentioned, are, there's no two the same, which,
Oh, well, yeah. Okay, I know what you're asking. So Peru the Andes in general are prone to earthquakes. And earthquakes played like a major role in the destruction of civilizations. So like Lima culture, this is in the city of Lima, they experienced a lot of earthquakes. And Lima culture really had always been there, but I could be wrong, and I'm not an expert about Lima culture. It's not really my interest, but I think their height is somewhere between 500 and 1000 AD. And they had experienced so many earthquakes that they learned how to build pyramids that were anti-seismic, so like they couldn't be knocked down. So what they would do is they would take bricks about like, can I grab this?
Yeah, please.
So they would take bricks about the size of this little.
Actually, that's full of dominoes, if that's
Okay,
helpful for your illustration.
Yeah. So they take bricks that are about this size, and then they sit them on top of each other. And so you put one here, but you leave a little space in between them. And then you take another block, like a lintel block, and you add it right here. So you have all these blocks stacked on top of each other with little bits of space. And so when an earthquake would happen, the whole structure would jiggle back and forth. And so it would never fall down. It would just move with the earth.
Oh, that's so clever.
And yeah, it's amazing. And so what we think is that by using stones that are this large, there's also something that you're not seeing here. So only the faces of the stones touch each other. As soon as it goes inside, so say, I'm trying to think of like, how can I describe this? So you have the face of the stone. And if you were to take one layer off and look down on it from the top, you would notice that the face here is connected, but on the inside, the sides of the stones move away from each other. So there's a triangular space between each side of the stone, and it's filled with gap fat. It's like this red paste glue stuff that they would make from llama fat.
It's like a mortar.
But kind of, but the way I would describe it is like shock absorber. And so when an earthquake happens, the blocks don't shatter because they're pressed against each other. You have a shock absorber between the stones. And so the stones are moving back and forth like this. And they stay perfectly, the various shapes of them. It allows the face on the outside to stay locked together. You crack go down the middle. and none of these stones are cracked because they have this
Almost like a cartilage.
that's what I was looking for. It's like a cartilage between the stones, and
And does the cartilage still exist?
yeah, yeah.
Like it hasn't like degraded due to.
I don't know about that, but I know that I have looked between stones and it's still there.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
That is so clever. And so it's basically like anti-earthquake technology.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And that's seen all through like Central and South America.
No. This is exclusively to what we call Inca sites, but
Because they're more earthquake prone.
yes,
Because
Yep.
they're on a fault line, I presume.
I don't know, but I would guess.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow, that is so interesting. I would never would have guessed
Now
that.
in Peru, the Inca are really the only people that achieved this kind of stonework. The only thing that's similar is in Bolivia. You have good lord, what's the name of it? Tiwanaku in Bolivia, and it's very similar stonework there. But Tiwanaku is a crazy place because it looks like a bomb went off in the city. It's just you have these giant stones just scattered around, and for so long nobody knew the assortment of the stones and how they all went together, and they've been reconstructed. Like somebody scanned it all and reconstructed it using like 3D models of blocks, and it what used to be some kind of building, and it's like it just blown up. Okay, so that's one there. So that's actually a courtyard. It looks like it's a building. It's the next photo over, sir. If you just go one to the right. One to the left of that one.
Oh,
Perfect.
that one. Oh,
So
wow.
so you can see all these stones. They're kind of so what they're done. What's happened here is they've laid all these blocks out, they've laid all these blocks out in a way where you can walk in between them, almost like it's a little museum. But in the original photos, they're like blown apart. It's just scattered all throughout Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, and nobody knew the original assortment of these stones for a long time, and we still don't necessarily know. There's just a model of it that was recreated where it was supposed to be some kind of temple that's surprisingly unique in the pre-Columbian world, like anything anyone has ever seen before. And nobody knows why they were all scattered about. My most boring answer is that it happened during like early colonial times, and they just ripped that thing apart for some reason, and it was never recorded.
Like it was. Do you think it was ripped apart by humans? Like not like a earthquake or some other type of natural phenomenon, overgrowth and
it's
roots.
it's like two. Well, so this is in a high altitude valley, so the overgrowth you wouldn't see that, and it's just grassland out there, and I don't think it was shaken apart by an earthquake because like the way the stones are scattered, it's just not the way it would look like in an earthquake. It looks like it was dismantled.
Strange.
You know, yeah. It's very odd, but it was never recorded. And so, my most boring guess is that in the early colonial period, they just dismantled the entire thing for who knows what reason. I don't know. And a lot of weird stuff happened in early colonial times that wasn't recorded. That's my most boring answer. My crazy answer?
Aliens.
My crazy answer is I don't know. I have no idea what would do that. There's other places in Egypt that are like this where the entire city is just utterly, completely destroyed, or I should say, the temple is complete. Like the temple of Bubastis, the temple of Tanis, Egypt. The city is just utterly annihilated, and there's no explanation. You know, I've seen ruined temples in Egypt, and they don't look like this. This looks like somebody hit this thing with a cruise missile. And it's very odd.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
I wonder, and like you wonder if the Spanish did it, they may have recorded it, right? Like they would have been like, "Hey, we destroyed a pagan temple. We got rid of this thing, and we're like proselytizing."
You would think so, but not all the time. You know, the Spanish were as good as they were bad. You know? A lot of really fascinating, brave, amazing Spaniards during the colonial periods, and then a lot of really bad, evil people.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, and when you were just in Peru, what was the specific site that you were looking at? Is that the one that we just saw with the stone?
Well, I went all over the place. I was in Cusco. I went to Sacsayhuaman. I went to what's the name of the? I went to Ollantaytambo. Why can't I think of it? There's another city I went to, and then Machu Picchu. And yeah, so went there, went to Machu Picchu twice. Machu Picchu's amazing. Have you ever been?
No, that is a
You gotta
bucket
go.
list
You
item
gotta
of
go.
mine.
It's. I was telling Joe this. It's more amazing than Egypt. It's not comparable. It's Egypt is in the middle of a major metropolitan area, and the pyramids sit up on top of this hill, and there's a million people there, and the smog is insane, and it's fine. But the pyramids are amazing. They really are one of the most amazing things in the entire world. It's not like being in the Andean Amazon after you've traveled for days to be able to get here. Like if I wanted to go see the pyramids, I could from New York, I could be there in 13 hours like that. As soon as I land in Cairo, I can see the pyramids. I cannot just be like, oh, I just want to go check out Machu Picchu. It's a journey.
Don't they limit visitors?
They do. Yeah.
Like you have to like get a ticket and like.
Yeah. Whereas at Giza, great example. At Giza, you can just show up and buy your ticket that day. You don't have to make a reservation. With Machu Picchu, you're looking at like 6 months in advance to book your ticket online. And then you have to travel all the way down to South America. You have to go from Lima to Cusco. And you have to go by car, and then you got to go by train to get into the Amazon to see Machu Picchu. And so it's a whole journey just to get out there. And then when you're standing up on the mountain, looking at the city with Huayna Picchu, the mountain top behind it, it's just man, yeah, like there's no comparison. This is one of the most amazing places in the entire world.
And do we know when this was built? Like, what is there an estimate on?
The vast majority of the site was made. The vast majority of the site was built during like the late Inca period. So right up to they were still building the city that when the Spanish arrived. So it's very, very late, at least the majority of the construction. But there's archaeological evidence of people on this mountain. I think 2000 BC. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
people have been living in this area for a long time.
Yeah.
But then Machu Picchu itself was built much closer to 13, 1400s.
Yeah. The main mystery here, the thing that gets thrown into a wrench is, do you see on here? Do you see the blank part in the middle of the city where it looks like it's like a dirt floor? So right next to where that grassy knoll is, just to the bottom left of that. Yep, right there.
That thing, yeah.
So they call that the Temple of the Moon, I believe, because they think that it has a lunar alignment, but I don't think it does. The alignment doesn't work. We don't really know what that temple was, but in that temple right there, it's the only part of Machu Picchu where you have the huge megalithic stones, the things that you would see in Sacsayhuaman and in Cusco. Oh yeah, so you can tell like those stones are really, really, really massive. I would say one of those stones is the size of your entire wall here.
Wow.
And up on top of this mountain, it's really amazing. And so that's kind of the wrench that gets thrown in here. It's like, okay, if it was a precursor civilization and it wasn't the Inca, why did they only build one temple here on top of this mountain like this? And all the rest of it is built with. It's still great architecture, but it's much more crude than that. So it's this wrench that gets thrown in where people will think Machu Picchu must be built by this really advanced ancient civilization. However, when I was there, I wasn't expecting it, but it was only that one temple that had that construction. So I was like, well, did those guys really come out here and only build this one temple way out here up on top of this mountain? I don't know.
I mean, is it crazy to think that a precursor civilization built a specific smaller, relatively temple with these giant megalithic rocks, and then a later civilization built the rest of it?
It's not crazy. Yeah, the ancient world is a foreign country. Like you're saying, it's not crazy, but it certainly challenges like my rational thinking, right? Because you almost have to throw your rational thinking out of the window in some cases when you're studying the ancient world, because, I look at this, and in one way, I look at this one temple and I go, oh, I came to Machu Picchu. Yeah, it's only this one temple that has this massive megalithic stonework. I don't think an ancient precursor civilization would come all the way out here just to build one building. don't know. Maybe the Inca really did do it, and the reason this stonework is here like this is because this was one particularly important building. However, that's assuming that I understand even 1% of the Inca mindset or the ancient Peruvian mindset. There could be a perfectly rational explanation if I could talk to someone who lived in a precursor civilization and be like, well, why did you build this? And they would go, oh, why did we come all the way out here to do this? Well, because this, and that happened. And we thought we needed to build this here for this sacred alignment in the sky, blah, blah, blah. And I would go, oh, that's crazy. Okay.
That makes complete sense.
And then they would, and, and if he could be like, and there's actually more of these scattered throughout the mountains here that you just haven't found. And I'd be like, oh, I get it. So this is it's like a pilgrimage. It's like a place of study or worship or astronomy or whatever. And it's this one place where you got to, I mean, dude, Native Americans do all kinds of stuff. Like the more I've gotten into this, it's so much of a battle to remind myself to constantly remind myself that I don't know everything, because it's like Linda Shealy, who was my mentor's mentor. She's a world-class Maya archaeologist, and she would constantly say that we need people from outside of the field to look inwards because it's so easy to know so much that you confuse yourself. Like you get so lost in
right. You get so close to the mosaic, you can't even tell what you're looking at.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. And so I constantly have to take a huge step back, and like, okay, why would just arguing for the ancient lost civilization idea? It's possibly just as likely that this little temple here existed long before the rest of the city because the people who went there would perform something that I think it's the Native Americans of the Great Plains that would go out into the wilderness and starve themselves and like hang themselves to a tree and starve themselves until they would hallucinate and they would have visions, and then they would go back and give like the prophecies of that vision, and that was like a central core component to that society. Well, this could easily be the same thing, right? So it's like it's just a completely alien world that we're trying to study here, and to feel super confident about assertions about something like this is I think it's a misstep. So anyways, yeah, that's Machu Picchu.
Is there anything else with Machu Picchu that you find interesting or stark? Like obviously we have this one specific temple that was potentially used for something. I'm maybe remiss in calling it a temple, but was there a large population of people living here at one point?
They don't think so. They think that the population was under 1,000 people. There have been people who've gone in and like looked at each and every room and exactly how much water. So from where the photo is being taken, you're actually standing on Machu Picchu, and what you're looking at, this peak in the background that we always think of when we think of Machu Picchu, that's actually Huayna Picchu. So he's standing on Machu Picchu. Most people have never actually seen a photo of Machu Picchu. It's funny. So if you zoom out, thank you so much. So on Machu Picchu, the mountain that he's standing on, there's a spring up at the top. It comes out of the mountain and it trickles down. And they reshaped the mountainside, and they made these aqueducts where they turned the path of the water to go down into the city. So originally it was just going off the mountainside. They turned it to the side, and it goes down into the city, and it winds through the city into these I say natural, but they're fountains with natural spring water coming out. And you can drink the water today, and the fountains have been running for since the city was made. It's amazing. And so what's crazy is they say that, at least the research that's been done, is that 60%. Here's something else I should add. Most of the megalithic architecture at Machu Picchu, the only thing that's accessible is that one temple, but they found other gigantic stones like that underneath the floor that you walk on. Like the entire foundation is made up of those megalithic stones. And 60% of the stonework of itself at Machu Picchu is the foundation of the city, because it has tunnels in it that are about this big, and it directs the water. And it provides a stable foundation for this city that exists on top of a mountain in an area that gets plagued by earthquakes. So they built up the foundation of the city. Yeah, it's totally insane. And so the tunnels aren't accessible. Oh yeah, so here's where one of them pops out. And so you can go up and drink that water today. It comes right out of the mountain.
That is wild.
There's so much, man. It's an amazing place. What I think Machu Picchu is when I'm there, oh yeah, it's beautiful. What I think Machu Picchu is when I'm there is I very much get a Library of Alexandria feel. This is a place of study. This is a place where the most important people of the civilization were allowed to come here. And another thing that's really fascinating about it, man, this is what it is right now. I haven't talked about this publicly. So like lost cities of the Inca, this idea has fascinated explorers for a really long time. There was a city called Vilcabamba that the American explorer Hiram Bingham was looking for. And Vilcabamba is the city that the last Inca emperor fled to. And sorry, I'm blanking on his name right now. I'm blanking on several things. Manco Inca. He's the last Inca emperor. He took about 250,000 Inca people out of Cusco, and they either built a new city or there was an ancient city that they knew that they could use way out. Yeah, so here's Manco Inca. There was an ancient city that existed out in the Amazon. I say the Andean Amazon, but it's still in the Amazon. That was available. Maybe it was abandoned, or maybe it was like not a very powerful place. But he knew it's where he could bring several hundred thousand people to come build this new colony to get away from the Spaniards. So he takes 250,000 to like 500,000 Inca people out of Cusco. It's basically a mass exodus way out into the mountains to a place called Vilcabamba. And I think that they live out there in peace, and no one knew where they were for 11 years. And then Manco Inca comes back into like the semi-contacted like colonial world, and he gets stabbed to death in the street. And eventually the city of Vilcabamba, like the people kind of starve out and they have to come back. And the city is eventually lost to history. But it was this famous lost Inca city. And this is where the story gets interesting, because Hiram Bingham was looking for that in the Peruvian Amazon and accidentally found Machu Picchu. He never found the city of Vilcabamba. It was later explorers that went on and found Vilcabamba. So what this has opened up here, and I think that this is only sort of recently, and it's something that I only became privy to last month in Peru, was I was talking to a Peruvian historian there, and he was telling me about his idea that there's something more special about Machu Picchu than the city of Vilcabamba, because Vilcabamba was no secret. It was only the location was a secret, but everyone knew about
there's a huge exodus.
Yeah. But Machu Picchu, the Inca explicitly went out of their way to never, ever talk about it. They abandoned it at contact period when the Spaniards when they had taken over Cusco and they were starting to spread out. The Inca people picked up everything and abandoned Machu Picchu, because they can tell when they excavated it, there was like nothing there. Literally, there was nothing in the city. Other than there's some leftover artifacts. Like there's a little museum there, but it's like stark how much is not there that should have been. And so there's this idea that, okay, well, they must have picked up and left and abandoned the city. But never, nobody, not one Inca person, all of the Incas that were interviewed and used as sources in Spanish chroniclers, not one person ever even uttered the actual name of Machu Picchu. So nobody knows its significance, why it was so significant, and why the Inca people explicitly went out of their way to not even utter its name.
I mean, the silence kind of indicates the importance in a way,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Why do we know that it's called Machu Picchu? Like, what does that mean? Was that
It's the name of the mountain.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the name of the mountain.
And that's the name that the Inca used.
No. Well, it's the name that the Inca people were using in 1911 when Hiram Bingham was down there and found the city, right? So they called the mountain Machu Picchu, but this is 115 years ago. That's what they called that mountain. So he just used, if my history is correct, he just used the same name for the mountain for the city.
That makes sense.
Yeah. We do not know what the city's name was.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
And the fact that they keep it so silent, it does kind of give it an air of reverence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or maybe like a hideaway. But it's also a massive undertaking to build a city like that, to not tell anyone or not have anyone know.
Right. My thought is there's so many observatories. There's little reflection pools that are in So reflection pool is about this big, and they found other reflection pools that are made out of slate and like black basalt. And man, they're so expertly made. It's amazing. Like we talk about the. I'm sure you've seen the like the precision pre-dynastic vases from Egypt.
Yep.
That kind of stonework. The same quality of stonework is seen in these reflection pools.
Wow.
And it's basically this circular clock about this big. It's just perfectly carved and perfectly circular. And so they would sit it in the middle of these open roofed buildings. And so astronomers would sit down, and there's these little grid marks on the side of these bowls. And so they'd have the water sitting perfectly flat in it, and they would be watching the stars inside this bowl. And so they were figuring out like the cosmic wheel. And these artifacts have been found all throughout Machu Picchu. It's one of the most common things found at Machu Picchu. And so my thought is, oh, this is an Alexandria type situation here. This is a university. This is where all the brightest minds in the Inca world were right here.
Wow.
For a long time, it was thought of as the Playboy Mansion of the emperor. Like, what would they do? There was this legend that one of the palaces that's at Machu Picchu is like the palace of the concubines, or it's like where his concubines were being held, and one of them's called the nursery because he would impregnate all the most beautiful women, and they would give birth here. That's kind of just a myth, or at least people say it's a myth. There's nothing really behind it. These are just kind of popular myths and legends that have been passed down. But the way my mentor, Dr. Ed Barnhart, and I look at it is like it's probably both. It's the Inca emperor can do whatever he wants. Machu Picchu is the most stunning place in the Inca realm, maybe other than the ancient city of Cusco itself. Cusco must have really been amazing. But like, if in the winter the Inca emperor wants to go up to Machu Picchu where there's these amazing views and the brightest minds, well, why wouldn't he have like some concubines there to hang out with, while he's got, so I don't know. But yeah, Machu Picchu, my guess is probably all of the sacred knowledge of the understanding of the cosmos and the universe and maybe religion is happening at Machu Picchu. And
now, it's difficult to get to Machu Picchu now. How difficult must it have been then?
Oh, it was almost impossible. I mean, yeah. I mean, he talks.
This is a 2-week journey, like by foot.
Oh man, I don't know how long it took him to get to Machu Picchu from Cusco because he didn't know he was looking for it. He's kind of meandering through these outskirts of the Inca realm and asking locals for clues. I'm looking for this lost city of Vilcabamba. Is there anything that you here? This is like here's like the discovery of Machu Picchu in like a paragraph. Hiram Bingham is going through the outskirts of the Inca realm. He knows about the lost city of Vilcabamba. He knows it's off to the east of Cusco in the Andean Amazon, so where the Andes Mountains meets the Amazon. It's just a jungle. It's a mountainous jungle. And so he's going from village to village and asking the locals, do you know of anything of cities in the jungle, like abandoned cities? You ever seen, like Timbuktu, and trying, communicating with them, and all of them are like, yes, and he would be taken to sites left and right. Most of them were very insignificant, and I think like all of them were not that significant. There would be little vestiges along the river where there'd be like a little farmhouse at the bottom of a river that was covered up by the overgrowth. But on top of it, you could see the terraces going up the mountain. You could tell, oh, this was a wealthy farmer who was wealthy enough to build this big stone house. But this isn't a city. This is like his estate, basically. And so the locals out near the modern day city of Aguada Phoenix say, yes, up here on top of this mountain, there's some temples up there that we know about. And he's like, okay, take me up there. Now, these are temples that, think about it, probably 600 years ago, or I'm sorry, 500 years ago-ish. Everybody leaves. Like, probably you had, my guess when I'm up there and I'm just thinking about all the little stuff that never gets recorded in history, you probably had people who are living down at the bottom of the mountain that are just farming, because there's all kinds of farming terraces there too. So you had 700 people that lived in the principal part of the city, but you probably had maybe a few thousand that lived on the outskirts, and they were all farmers, right? Lower class people. Well, when the city gets abandoned, you definitely have people that are like, dude, we should just go live up there. You know,
Right?
let's
Like,
just go. Let's
you
just
got
go.
a sick spring, like you got
Yeah.
nice little architecture.
We know that this was happening in the Maya world. Like we found evidence of later Maya people living in the ruins and hanging out. Like we've even found little Maya board games from kids that were going and hanging out in abandoned buildings,
Oh, that's
playing games,
so cool.
like kids do today. So yeah, it's amazing. And all of that was pre-Columbian, right? So it's like we found evidence of kids hanging out in abandoned buildings after the city had been abandoned, way before Columbus was ever there. So it's just fascinating. So you probably have these farmers that when Machu Picchu gets abandoned, all these guys are like, dude, we're not going to Vilcabamba. Let's just go live up there. Like the Spanish aren't going to find us. And then eventually those people get absorbed into as the modern world spreads out into those furthest reaches, they eventually come down from the mountain to get things like plumbing, electricity, blah, 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 right? And then the jungle just grows over all those ruins and they sit up there, and a few generations later, the grandchildren of those people are like, yeah, there is like a little town up there or whatever that my great grandpa used to run around in, but
Right.
I've never been up there. I've never, and then so this guy comes in and he's like, oh, this gringo wants to go see these stupid abandoned buildings. Okay, yeah, well, give me $100 and I'll take you up there. And so they go up there, and it's there's it was really, really difficult to get up there because they didn't know exactly how to get up the mountain, because at some points it's just sheer rock granite face.
Right.
And there's all kinds of stories of they'd be going up and it'd start raining in the middle of the day. Because it rains almost every day there. He had his guys like falling down the side of the mountain. I don't think anybody died, but they would slip and fall and roll like 30 feet. And then so everybody, according to the story, everyone would just bust out laughing, and they would all just sit on the side of the mountain for like 30 more minutes and rest, and then go back up. And I think it takes him